There is a moment, late in Adventure Time, where Jake the dog climbs into a collapsing wooden shack on the edge of the sea, lies down among the rotting boards, and asks his brother to leave him there. Not to save him, not to feel sorry for him. He has wanted, for as long as he can remember, to know what it feels like to be a brick. And a storm is finally rolling in off the water to let him find out. He is not sad. He is not scared. He is about as content as a creature can be, waiting to be flooded and buried and forgotten. Because for one afternoon he gets to be a small, still thing that holds a wall up and watches the world go by. That, right there, is the whole strange gospel of Jake, and almost nobody talks about it. Tonight we are going through all of it, slowly, from the mud he thought he was born in, to the afterlife where he finally lets go. You are here with Marcy. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, we will be here a long while, and if you have not subscribed yet, it honestly does help us keep making these. Let me start with the simplest thing about him, which is also the strangest, and that is what Jake actually is. On the surface he is a dog, a yellow dog with a round belly and short legs, and a face built for grinning. And for whole stretches of the show, that is exactly how he behaves, chasing his own tail, falling asleep in the sun, following his nose toward whatever smells like bacon. But Adventure Time tells you, gently and then not so gently, that he is not really a dog at all, or at least not only a dog. The wiki lists him as a dog and a shapeshifter, a hybrid, and the fans and the writers tend to land on the same shorthand, that Jake is a magic dog. Because one of his own pups will be named Jake Jr., he is sometimes styled Jake the Dog, Sr., which already tells you this creature is going to have children and grow old. And both of those facts matter more than they first seem. He is one of the two heroes of the series, the deuteragonist, which is a heavy word for a light idea, that he is the second lead, the one who walks beside the hero rather than being the hero. And the philosophy of Jake begins right there, in the fact that he is perfectly happy to be the one walking beside. His voice is worth naming early, because it does a lot of quiet work. Jake is voiced by John DiMaggio, and if that name does not ring a bell, the voice will, because DiMaggio is also Bender from Futurama, that gravelly, wisecracking, deeply confident rasp. He brings some of that same swagger to Jake, but he softens it, rounds off the meanness, and what you get is a voice that sounds like it has already seen everything and decided most of it was fine. That is a strange thing to build a children's cartoon character on. A voice that sounds like it has already made peace with the world, and yet that is exactly the voice the series gives to Jake, and it colors everything he says. When Jake tells you that sucking at something is the first step toward being good at it, it does not land as a lecture. It lands as a shrug from someone who has sucked at a great many things and lived to tell you it was fine. The show says he is 28 magical dog years old during the series, and I love that the number comes with a qualifier, magical dog years, as if the writers knew that a straight number would feel wrong. 28 is old enough to have a past and young enough to still be having adventures, and the vagueness of magical dog years lets him be both an overgrown kid and a weary old soul in the same scene, sometimes in the same sentence. He plays the viola, which is a wonderfully specific choice for a character who otherwise seems allergic to effort, the viola being the instrument nobody picks first, the middle voice, the one that fills in the warmth underneath the melody. And there is a worm named Shelby who lives inside that viola, which is the kind of detail Adventure Time drops without explanation and never takes back. A worm lives in his instrument, that is simply true, and the show expects you to carry it with you. Here is the thing I want you to hold on to as we go, the thread that runs under all the goofiness. Jake was created by Pendleton Ward, and when Ward described what he and the crew imagined the two heroes wanting out of their adventures, he put it as slaying monsters, exploring dungeons, and finding loot. And then he added a small line that tells you almost everything, that Jake was more into the loot. Finn wanted the fight and the glory and the being good. Jake wanted the treasure at the end, and the nap after the treasure, and the meal after the nap. That is not laziness exactly, though it looks like laziness. It is a different theory of what a life is for. Finn's theory is that a life is a series of quests to be completed. Jake's theory, the one we are going to trace all the way to his death and past it, is that a life is a series of moments to be enjoyed, and that if you are lucky and paying attention, almost any moment will do. And I will be honest with you now, before we go any further, so that this does not turn into a 2-hour love letter to a cartoon dog. Jake is not wise the way a monk is wise. He is not a philosopher who read the books and did the work. In his youth, before any of the adventuring, Jake was a criminal, a successful one, who led his own gang, and the story never fully scrubs that out of him. He gives advice that is sometimes terrible. He is lazy in ways that hurt people. He is greedy, he is impulsive, he lies to himself for years about where he came from. And more than once, his big, relaxed philosophy is really just an excuse to avoid something hard. What makes him worth 2 hours of your falling asleep is not that he is right about everything, it is that he stumbled, by instinct and by accident and by love, onto a way of being in the world that a lot of very serious people have spent their whole lives trying to reach on purpose. He got there sideways. He got there without meaning to. That is the story, and we are going to take it one piece at a time. For most of his life, Jake believed he got his powers from a mud puddle. That is the story he told, the one he carried around like a good luck coin, that when he was a puppy, he rolled around in a special magic mud puddle and came out able to stretch and shrink and become anything he wanted. It is a lovely little origin, the kind a child would invent, and it fits him perfectly, because it makes his gift into something that just happened, a bit of dumb luck, a puddle in the right place at the right time. There is no burden in it. There is no lineage, no debt, no monster at the far end of it. You roll in the mud, you come out magic, and then you go have breakfast. If Jake had a coat of arms, it would be a mud puddle, because it says everything about how he preferred to understand himself, as a happy accident that turned out fine. The truth is much stranger and much darker, and Adventure Time makes him look right at it. Jake's father, or the father who raised him, was a dog named Joshua, a detective, married to a dog named Margaret. Long before Jake existed, Joshua and Margaret were on a case, and Joshua was bitten on the head by a creature called Warren Ampersand, an extra-dimensional shape-shifting thing that does not belong to this world at all. The bite made Joshua sick. A growth swelled up on his head, a pustule, and out of that growth, out of that wound, Jake was born. He did not come from Margaret. He came from a sore on his father's skull, seeded there by an alien bite. That is where the stretching comes from. That is where the magic comes from. Not a puddle at all, but a bite from something that eats worlds. And for years and years, none of them told him, and he told himself the puddle instead. The show does not just have someone explain this to him, it walks him into it. In one of the later seasons, in an episode called The First Investigation, Finn and Jake end up moving through time, and Jake witnesses his own birth. He watches it happen. He sees Joshua, he sees the growth, he sees himself come into the world from the top of his father's head, and he understands, standing there, that the story he told for his entire life was a comfortable lie sitting on top of a fact he never wanted. And I think the way he takes it is the first real glimpse of his whole philosophy under pressure. He does not fall apart. He does not rage at his parents for the lie. He absorbs it, the way he absorbs a lot of blows, by widening rather than hardening. The mud puddle was easier. The truth is that he is the child of a wound, and he decides, more or less, that he can live with being the child of a wound. Read this way. The mud puddle is the first thing Jake ever taught himself, and it is a lesson about mercy toward the self. He did not know the truth, so he made a truth that let him get out of bed and go be a dog, and there is something almost wise in that, a refusal to be poisoned by a past he did not choose. But it is also, and I do not want to only flatter him here, a habit that runs through his whole character and does not always serve him, this instinct to smooth an ugly fact into a nicer story so he does not have to sit in the ugliness. Sometimes that instinct is grace. Sometimes it is avoidance wearing the costume of grace. Jake spends the series learning, slowly, which is which, and the origin is where it starts, with a grown dog finding out that the puddle was never real, and choosing, on purpose this time, to keep loving the life the lie protected. What gets me about it is that he does not throw the puddle away out of bitterness. He just quietly sets it down and picks up the harder thing and keeps walking. Now let me talk about the powers themselves, because they are not just a fun cartoon gimmick. They are the clearest picture the show ever gives you of how Jake's mind actually works. The wiki calls them his stretchy powers, and the description is almost absurdly open-ended. He can stretch, shrink, or mold any part of his body into nearly any shape and size, from gigantic to microscopic. He becomes a ladder when Finn needs to climb. He becomes a boat when they need to cross water. He becomes armor, a trampoline, a key, a bridge, a snail hiding in a corner of the frame, a house, a hat, 100 tiny copies of himself. There is no fixed Jake shape that the others are exceptions to. The round yellow dog is just the form he rests in, the way you might rest in a favorite chair, and at any moment he can pour himself into whatever the situation needs and then pour himself back. And here is what I find beautiful about that, and it is the thing the philosophy books circle around when they write about him. Through every one of those shapes, Jake stays Jake. He can be a boat and still be lazy about it. He can be a suit of armor and still crack a joke from inside the breastplate. The form changes completely, and the essence does not change at all. That is a very old idea, dressed up in a very silly body. In a lot of contemplative traditions, the whole practice is learning to feel the part of you that does not change, while everything around it, and even about it, is changing, the still thing under the moving things. Jake gets to literally do that, on screen, every episode. His body is in constant flux, and his self never wavers, and the series quietly proposes that this is not a superpower at all, but a way of understanding what a person even is. That you are not your shape, you are not your circumstances. You are the thing that is still there when the shape has been a ladder and a boat and a wall and a worm, and comes home to being a dog. The show has been read through Taoism more than once, and it is not a stretch, no pun intended. There is a concept in the Tao Te Ching called Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-action or effortless action, and it does not mean doing nothing, it means acting in accordance with the way things naturally move, like water, which never forces and always arrives. Water does not argue with the shape of the riverbed. It simply takes the shape and keeps going, and in taking every shape it stays entirely itself, entirely water. That is Jake almost exactly. He does not fight the shape a moment demands. He becomes it, without ego, without a long speech about how hard it is to become a bridge, and then he lets it go the instant it is no longer needed. Finn tends to attack a problem head-on, with a sword and a battle cry, and Jake tends to flow around it, to become whatever gets them through, and both of them are heroes, but only one of them is at peace. I think the story knows exactly what it is doing here, because it repeatedly contrasts Jake's improvisational, jazz-like approach with more rigid kinds of thinking. Jake does not do systems, he does not do rules for their own sake. He observes, he stretches, he smiles, and he trusts that the right shape will come to him when the moment arrives, and most of the time it does. There is a looseness to him that reads as laziness from the outside and reads as something closer to grace once you understand it, because a creature that can become anything has to learn not to grasp, not to cling to one form as the correct one, and Jake, without ever using a word like enlightenment, mostly does not cling. He would rather be comfortable than be impressive. He would rather flow than fight. And the powers, which look like the goofiest thing about him, turn out to be the truest thing about him. A body that has understood in its very cells that holding on to one shape is a kind of suffering, and letting go is a kind of freedom. There are limits to this, and I want to be careful not to turn him into a god. Early in the series, his control is not total. He cannot hold enormous or complicated forms for very long. He tires, he loses the shape, and only much later, after everything he goes through with his true origin, does he gain something close to real mastery over what his body can do. So the picture is not a magic dog who was always perfect and effortless. It is a creature slowly learning the depth of a gift he never understood, and the philosophy grows with the power. When he thought his magic came from a puddle, the stretching was just a party trick. Once he knows where it really comes from, the stretching becomes something he has to make peace with, a piece of a monster living inside a good and gentle dog, and the fact that he can still choose to be gentle with it, to use the World Eater's gift to make ladders for his brother, is maybe his most quietly heroic act. If the powers are the deepest thing about Jake, the pleasures are the nearest to hand, and I do not want to rush past them, because a philosophy that has nothing to say about pleasure is not much of a philosophy. Remember that when Pendleton Ward summed up the two of them, he gave Finn the monsters and the dungeons, and gave Jake the loot, and it was not a throwaway line. Jake likes things. He likes food most of all, and the show returns to this so often that his appetite becomes a kind of running argument for a way of living. He wants the sandwich. He wants the nap in the sun. He wants the treasure, not so he can be rich and important, but so that afterward there is money for more sandwiches and better naps. His most famous song is about bacon pancakes, a little tune he sings while cooking, "Makin' Bacon Pancakes," and it appears in a 4th season episode as background to a much heavier story, and it has escaped Adventure Time entirely to become the thing a lot of people know Jake for. this small, joyful chant about the simple good work of making breakfast. Now you could read all of that as shallow, and plenty of characters in the series gently accuse him of exactly that, of being a creature who thinks with his stomach. But there is a real and ancient position hiding under the bacon pancakes, and it is worth naming, because it is not the cartoon version people assume. The philosopher Epicurus, whose name has become an insult meaning greedy for luxury, actually taught something close to the opposite. He taught that the good life is a pleasant one, yes, but that the deepest pleasures are the simplest and cheapest, bread and water and friendship and a quiet afternoon, and that chasing more than you need is the surest way to be miserable, because desire without end is a kind of pain. Jake, without ever having read a word of it, mostly lives this. His pleasures are small and repeatable: a pancake, a nap, a song, his brother beside him. He is not trying to accumulate a mountain of anything. He wants the loot so the ordinary days can keep being ordinary and good, and there is a wisdom in that which the busier, hungrier characters around him never quite reach. There is a difference between Jake and a truly greedy creature, and the show draws it carefully. A greedy creature is never satisfied, always reaching for the next thing, unable to rest because the having is never enough. Jake is almost the reverse. He is satisfied embarrassingly easily. Give him a warm spot and a full belly and someone he loves nearby, and he is done. Completely, gloriously done, with no ambition pulling at him to be more or have more or become more. That capacity for contentment is rare, and it is the thing I think people most quietly envy in him, because a lot of us cannot do it, cannot let a good moment simply be good without immediately worrying about the next one. Jake can. Jake is a master of the good moment. He does not save his happiness for later, for when the quest is done, or the fort is finished, or the enemy is beaten. He takes it now, in small sips, all day long. And yet, being honest, this same trait is one of his real failings, and the story does not pretend otherwise, because a creature that is so easily content is also a creature that is hard to move. Jake's contentment can tip over into laziness, into leaving Finn to do the heavy lifting, into avoiding a hard conversation because the couch is comfortable and the pancakes are warm. His talent for enjoying the present can become an excuse for ignoring the future, for not doing the difficult thing today, because today is nice, and why ruin it? The show puts real weight on this later, when responsibilities pile up that a nap cannot make disappear, and Jake has to learn, painfully, that some good things in a life are not the small, repeatable pleasures, but the large, uncomfortable duties, and that you cannot pancake your way out of all of them. But that lesson only means anything because the contentment is real first. He is not a lazy creature pretending to be wise. He is a genuinely contented creature, slowly discovering the places where contentment is not enough. And that is a much more interesting thing to watch, and a much more useful thing to fall asleep thinking about. There is a line that follows Jake around the internet, one of the most quoted things he ever says, and it seems to contradict everything I just told you about his love of comfort. The line is that to live life, you need problems. That if you get everything you want the very minute you want it, then what is the point of living? Now I have to be careful here, because this is one of those quotes that gets attributed to him everywhere, and I could not pin down the exact episode with confidence, so I will give you the thought and not a false anchor. Many people trace it to early in the series, but I would rather you hold the idea than trust a number I cannot stand behind. What matters is the shape of the thought, and the shape is genuinely surprising coming from the pancake dog, because it is not a hedonist's line at all. It is almost the opposite. It says that a life with no obstacles, a life where every desire is granted instantly, would not be paradise, it would be death. It would be the end of anything worth calling living. Sit with that for a moment, because it is more radical than it sounds. We spend so much of our energy trying to remove problems from our lives, trying to reach a state where nothing is in the way, where every want is satisfied and every difficulty is gone, and we call that state happiness, or success, or peace. And here is a cartoon dog telling you that if you ever actually reached it, you would find it unbearable, because a want that is instantly filled is a want that never really existed, and a life made of instantly filled wants is a life with no story in it, no reaching, no becoming, nothing to push against. The problems are not the things standing between you and your life. The problems are your life. The wanting, the working, the failing, the slow closing of the gap between where you are and where you want to be. That gap is where all the meaning lives. And if you close every gap the instant it opens, You have not won, you have simply stopped. This is why I do not think Jake is actually as lazy as he looks, or at least not as simply lazy. A truly lazy creature would want the world he describes as unbearable, the world where everything comes the moment you want it. Jake does not want that world. Jake wants the treasure, but he also, on some level, wants the dungeon it is buried in, wants the walk to get there, wants the monster in the way, because without all of that, the treasure would just be a shiny thing sitting on a table, meaningless. His whole life with Finn is built out of problems he did not have to take on, monsters he did not have to fight, quests he could have slept through, and he keeps showing up for them, not because he is driven, but because somewhere underneath the comfort, he understands that a life of pure comfort is not a life. He needs the problems the same way he needs the naps, and the two needs are not in conflict, they are the two halves of a whole way of living, effort and rest, wanting and having, the gap and the closing of the gap. There is an old idea in a lot of philosophy that desire is the root of suffering, and that the way out of suffering is to extinguish desire, to want nothing and therefore lack nothing. Jake's line sits in a fascinating tension with that idea, and I do not think it simply agrees or disagrees. He would say, I think, that the goal is not to kill desire, but to hold it lightly, to enjoy the wanting itself, to treat the problem not as an enemy to be defeated so you can finally rest, but as the texture of a day, the thing that makes a day feel like something. He wants, and he is not tormented by the wanting, because he is in no rush to have. He can want a thing and enjoy a pancake at the same time. He can chase a treasure and nap on the way. The wanting does not own him, and that, more than any single adventure, is the trick he has figured out that most creatures never do. How to have desires without being ruled by them. How to keep a few good problems around, precisely because a life needs them. There is another line of his that has traveled even further, one you have probably seen even if you have never watched a single episode, and it is the one about failure. Jake says that sucking at something is the first step toward being sorta good at something. That is it. That is the whole teaching, delivered in a voice as casual as you can imagine, and it has ended up on posters and in graduation speeches, and stitched onto the inside of people's heads, because it is one of those rare pieces of advice that is both funny and completely true. Most encouragement about failure is grand and heavy. It talks about perseverance and grit and the long, hard road. Jake strips all of that away. He does not say failure builds character. He does not say what does not kill you makes you stronger. He says, more or less, of course you are bad at it. Everyone is bad at everything at first. Being bad at it is not the opposite of getting good at it. Being bad at it is the first part of getting good at it. The sucking is not a detour off the path. The sucking is the beginning of the path. I love how much pressure that quietly removes. So much of what stops people from starting anything is the shame of being bad at it. The feeling that being a beginner is somehow embarrassing. That if you were any good, you would already be good. Jake's line dissolves that shame completely, because it reframes the badness as a stage rather than a verdict. You are not bad at this because you are a failure. You are bad at this because you just started. And being bad is simply what the start looks like for everyone, always. There is no shortcut around it and no shame in it, and the only real mistake is refusing to be bad long enough to become good. It is, when you actually think about it, one of the most freeing things anyone can be told, and it comes out of the mouth of a dog who is barely paying attention. And this connects to something I think is the truest thing about Jake as a figure in Finn's life, which is that he is a teacher who does not know he is a teacher. Jake is older than Finn. He has been through more. He raised him in a real sense, and across the entire series he is the one handing Finn these little pieces of how to be alive. But he never lectures. He never sits Finn down for a lesson. The wisdom comes out sideways, in the middle of doing something else, dropped like an aside and then forgotten, and I think that is exactly why it lands. Finn is not being taught. He is being shown. He is watching how his brother meets the world, and absorbing it the way you absorb the habits of the people you grow up beside. Jake teaches the way a river teaches a stone, just by being there, just by flowing past the same spot for years. Now I said at the start I would be honest, so here is the other edge of it. Jake's advice is not always good. The show is very clear on this, and it is one of the things I find most human about him. The wiki itself notes that Jake gives somewhat questionable advice, and it is right. For every piece of accidental wisdom, there is a piece of nonsense delivered with exactly the same confidence. Some scheme that gets them both in trouble, some shortcut that backfires, some deeply Jake idea that only a creature this relaxed about consequences could have possibly thought was smart. He is not a sage. He is not right because he studied hard and reasoned carefully. He is right when he is right, by instinct and by accident, and he is wrong just as often. And part of growing up alongside him is learning to tell the difference, learning which of Jake's shrugging certainties to trust and which to gently ignore. His wisdom is earned and intuitive, never scholarly, and that means it comes mixed in with a lot of noise. The listener has to do some of the work. Finn has to do some of the work. But when a real one lands, when Jake says the thing about sucking at something, or the thing about needing problems, it lands harder than any careful lecture ever could, precisely because it was not careful, because it came from a place of lived experience rather than study, from a creature who has been bad at 1,000 things and treasured 1,000 small pleasures and simply reports back what he found. Everything I have described so far, the contentment, the letting go, the flowing with things, all of it gets its hardest test in the one place no philosophy can dodge, which is death. And this is where Jake becomes genuinely remarkable, because his relationship with his own death is unlike almost any other character in Adventure Time, and it starts early, in the 3rd season, in the episode The New Frontier. In that episode, Jake has a certain kind of dream, and to understand why it terrifies him, you have to understand a specific rule of this world. 1. The show builds carefully. There is a being called the Cosmic Owl, an enormous cosmic figure who appears in a particular kind of dream, and there are 2 kinds. A premonition dream shows you a future event, and the Cosmic Owl is always present in it. And a croak dream is a darker subset, a dream that shows you how you are going to die. It is not always literal, it is open to interpretation, but the understanding is that what a croak dream shows will eventually come to pass, and the very presence of the Cosmic Owl in a dream can help make it come true. So Jake has one of these dreams. It involves a rocket ship and Banana Man and being out in space and a feeling of suffocation, and at the end of it, the Cosmic Owl. And Jake wakes up and understands, by the rules of his own world, that he has just been shown his death. And this is the whole reason the episode matters for us. Jake does not panic. He does not spend the episode desperately trying to cheat the dream or hide from it or rage against it. He becomes calm. He becomes, if anything, serene. He accepts that he is going to die in this particular way, and rather than making him miserable, the acceptance seems to settle something in him, because now he knows, and knowing removes the worst part of death, which is not death itself, but the not knowing when and how. He treats the prophecy almost as a gift, a piece of certainty in an uncertain life, and he goes about his day lighter for having it, ready to meet the thing whenever it decides to arrive. Think about how strange and how enormous that is. Most of us organize a huge amount of our lives around the avoidance of death, around not thinking about it, around pretending it is far away and might somehow not apply to us. Yet here we have a character who is told directly, "This is how you die," and whose response is essentially, "All right, good to know," and then he goes and enjoys his afternoon. That is either denial or it is a kind of enlightenment, and the series, I think, wants you to feel that it is closer to the second, because everything else about Jake points that way. His whole way of being, the flowing, the not clinging, the contentment with the present moment, all of it was secretly preparation for exactly this, for the ability to hear the worst news imaginable and remain at peace. He has spent his life practicing letting go of forms, letting go of the shape of the moment and pouring into the next one, and death is only the last and largest version of that same motion, the final letting go of the final form. But there is a twist, and it is one of the more moving things the story ever does with him, so I want to lay it out carefully. The croak dream turns out not to be his death at all. Later, in the episode The Comet, the situation from the dream actually happens. Jake really is out in space, really is in danger, really is suffocating, and Banana Man really is there. And instead of the dream being the moment Jake dies, Banana Man saves him. The dream did not foreshadow his death. It foreshadowed his rescue. The very scene he had spent seasons understanding as his ending turned out to be the scene where he was pulled back into life. And I find that almost unbearably beautiful, because it means Jake made peace with a death that was never coming, and the peace was not wasted, the peace was the point. He got to practice the acceptance without paying the price for it, and when the moment arrived, it was not an ending but a gift, a friend reaching out a hand. Read this way: The New Frontier and The Comet together are a small complete argument about how to hold your own mortality. You will not know, most likely, exactly how or when you will die, but you can live as though you have already accepted it. And that acceptance costs you nothing and gives you everything, because it lets you stop bracing, stop flinching, stop spending the good hours defending against a thing you cannot prevent anyway. Jake accepted his death and got to keep living, and he lived better for the accepting. There is a version of the lesson that says, fear death and fight it every second, and the show gently sets that version aside in favor of Jake's, which is to make your peace early, hold your life loosely, and let the ending, whenever and however it comes, find you already unclenched. And the fact that his particular ending, that time, turned out to be a rescue, is Adventure Time's way of rewarding him, of saying that the creature who is ready to let go is exactly the creature life keeps choosing to hold on to a little longer. If there is a single episode that is the beating center of everything I am trying to say about Jake, it is the one I opened with, the one where he becomes a brick. It is a 6th season episode called Jake the Brick, and on paper it sounds like as dull a premise as a cartoon could possibly attempt. Jake reveals that he has a dream, a real lifelong dream, and the dream is to be a brick in a house during a storm, not to be a hero of the storm, not to survive the storm, just to be one small piece of a wall while the weather does what weather does. So he finds an old collapsing shack out on its own, and he shapeshifts himself into a brick and settles into the structure, and he waits for the storm to come, and Finn, bewildered but loving, agrees to let him do this strange thing. And then the episode becomes something almost no other cartoon would have the patience to become. Jake, lying there as a brick, starts narrating. He has a walkie-talkie, and he begins to describe, out loud, in this soft, wondering voice, the small life unfolding around the shack. There is a rabbit. Jake watches the rabbit and starts telling its story, the rabbit going about its ordinary business as the storm builds, and without meaning to, his voice goes out over the radio, picked up by a broadcaster back in town, and it spreads. All across the land of Ooh, people stop what they are doing and start listening to a dog describe a rabbit. The whole land goes still and tunes in, and the storm comes, and it is a real storm, wind and flood and danger, and the rabbit's home is destroyed. A tree falls and crushes it, and everyone listening holds their breath. And then the rabbit, without any drama, simply moves into the hollow of the very tree that fell on its house and starts making a new home inside the thing that destroyed the old one. And Jake narrates all of it, and all of Ooh weeps and cheers over the fate of a single rabbit in a single storm, because Jake's attention has made it matter. I could talk about this episode for the whole video. It is, read one way, the clearest picture of meditation ever put in a children's show, and I do not think that is an accident. What is Jake actually doing out there in the shack? He is holding perfectly still. He has given up doing anything, given up acting on the world, and instead he is simply watching, with total attention, the tiny ordinary events in front of him. And in watching them that closely, they stop being ordinary. The rabbit becomes an epic. The storm becomes a drama with real stakes. A patch of wet ground becomes a whole world worth the attention of an entire country. This is exactly what contemplative traditions promise, that if you actually pay attention, if you slow all the way down and stop grasping for the next thing and just look at what is in front of you, the mundane turns luminous, the small becomes miraculous, and you do not need a grand adventure to feel awe. You need only to look at a rabbit long enough to see that its little life is as full of everything as your own, and the impermanence of it is the deepest layer. The rabbit loses its home. In most stories, that would be the tragedy, the sad part, the loss. But the episode refuses to treat it as a tragedy, because the rabbit does not treat it as a tragedy. The rabbit does not sit in the rubble and mourn. It adapts, immediately, and builds a new home out of the wreckage of the old one, inside the very tree that killed it. That is impermanence met with grace. That is the whole hard truth of a life, that everything you build will eventually fall. Every home is temporary. Every wall comes down in some storm or other. And the question is never how to keep the wall standing forever, because you cannot. The question is whether you can do what the rabbit does. Whether when your home falls you can climb into the fallen thing and start again without bitterness, treating the collapse not as the end of the story, but as the material for the next chapter of it. And of course, Jake is a brick in a house during all of this, which means he too is part of a structure that the storm is trying to bring down, and he does not mind. He wanted to be the wall, precisely so he could feel what it is to be a small temporary thing holding on during a storm. and to be at peace with the holding, and at peace with the eventual falling. He is not narrating from a safe distance. He is in it, part of the impermanence he is describing, and that is why the narration lands, because it is not a lecture about acceptance, it is acceptance performed. A creature lying still in a collapsing house, telling you about a rabbit and finding the whole of existence in it. The mundane becomes miraculous. That is the phrase people reach for with this episode, and it is right. But I would add that the miracle was always available. It did not appear because of the storm. It appeared because Jake finally slowed down enough to see it, and then, by speaking it aloud, he let a whole land slow down and see it with him. That, more than any battle he ever fought, is the wisest thing this dog ever did, and it was done lying completely still. There is another 6th season episode that takes a stranger route to a related idea, and it is called Everything's Jake, and it is one of the odder things the series ever made, which is saying something. It begins with Magic Man, the trickster figure who is forever tormenting people with cruel little spells, doing something to Jake that causes him to fold inward, to shrink and collapse into himself. And instead of that being the end of him, Jake finds that inside his own body there is a whole world, an entire land made of Jake flesh, populated by little people who are all, in a sense, made of him, all of them living their lives on the landscape of his own insides. The inhabitants of this inner world are voiced almost entirely by a single actor, Billy West, which is its own quiet joke, one voice for a whole population, because of course they are all Jake. They are all one being wearing 1,000 faces. And the problem the episode hands him is beautifully cruel. Jake is hungry, he is inside himself, and he is starving, and the only food available is the world around him, which is to say, himself. He can eat, and sate his hunger for a while, but everything he eats is a piece of the living world inside him, a piece of those little people's homes and land, a piece of his own body and being. He cannot actually gain sustenance from eating himself, because there is no outside coming in. It is a closed loop, consuming himself to feed himself, which nets nothing and only destroys the world in the process. So he is forced into a choice between his own immediate hunger and the survival of an entire living world that depends on him not consuming it. You can read this a few ways, and the show lets you. There is an environmental reading right on the surface, the obvious one, that we are all doing exactly this, living inside a single closed world and consuming it to feed appetites that consuming it can never actually satisfy, eating the very ground we stand on and calling it progress, and that the only sane response is restraint, is choosing to preserve the world rather than devour it even when you are hungry, even when devouring it would feel good right now. Jake, the great hedonist, the creature we have spent this whole time watching pursue every small pleasure, is asked to not eat, to sit in his hunger for the sake of something larger than his hunger, and it is a real test of him, because appetite is the thing he trusts most. But there is a deeper reading too, and it is the one that stays with me. The episode is a literal picture of an old poetic idea, that a person contains multitudes, that inside any one of us is not a single simple self, but a whole crowded world of selves, contradictions, little people all made of the same stuff, pulling in different directions. Jake looks inward and finds not emptiness and not a single soul, but a populated land, a civilization of himself, and he has to learn to be its steward rather than its consumer, to care for the world inside him instead of feeding on it. And I think that is a genuinely profound thing to hand a character, especially this character, because Jake spends so much of the series pointed outward, at pancakes and treasure and adventure, and here the story turns him inward and shows him that the same principles apply, that you cannot cannibalize your own inner world to satisfy a surface craving, that the self is not a resource to be strip-mined but a place to be tended. And it rhymes, in a way, with the brick. In the shack he learned to look outward at the smallest thing until it became infinite. Inside himself he learns to look inward at the smallest thing, the little people, made of his own flesh, and find that it is infinite too, that there is a whole world in there deserving of the same care and attention he gave the rabbit. The direction is reversed, but the lesson is the same, that everything, no matter how small, no matter whether it is out in the storm or buried inside your own body, is a full world if you slow down and refuse to consume it thoughtlessly. Jake the Great Appetite becomes, for one strange episode, Jake the Great Restrainer, and the fact that he manages it, that the hungriest creature in Adventure Time can choose not to eat when eating would destroy a world, tells you that his hedonism was never the whole story, that underneath the pancakes, there was always a creature capable of putting something ahead of his own hunger. For all his flowing and his shape-shifting and his contentment, the thing that most grounds Jake, the thing that keeps his philosophy from floating off into pure detachment, is that he loves specific people, deeply and for the long haul. And the first great love of his adult life is Lady Rainicorn. She is a Rainicorn, which in this world means a hybrid of a rainbow and a unicorn, a long serpentine creature who flies and phases through solid matter and can alter color and even reality with her horn. And she is one of the most fully realized romantic partners any cartoon has bothered to give its hero's sidekick. And the detail that everyone notices first is that she speaks Korean. She is voiced by Nikki Yang, and Lady Rainicorn's dialogue is actually in Korean, untranslated for most of the audience, which means that for a huge portion of the show her exact words are a mystery to viewers who do not speak the language. And yet you never once doubt what she means, because the relationship is legible in everything but the words. I find that choice a little bit radical, and I want to think about what it does to Jake specifically. This is a creature whose whole way of being is intuitive rather than verbal, who trusts feeling over logic, who reads situations by vibe rather than by analysis, and the series pairs him with a partner he cannot fully understand on the level of language, only on the level of love. Jake understands Korean, within the fiction, so between the two of them there is no barrier at all. But the audience is placed in the position of loving across a gap, of watching a relationship that works completely even though a wall of untranslated language sits right in the middle of it. And I think that is a deliberate picture of what love actually is for Jake. That it is not about perfect comprehension, not about understanding every word your partner says, but about a deeper attunement underneath the words, a willingness to meet another being fully even when parts of them will always remain a little foreign to you. That is a mature idea of love, and the story delivers it through a rainbow snake and a magic dog without ever making a speech about it. They are also a study in difference, the two of them. Lady Rainicorn is elegant, graceful, capable of enormous power, connected to a rich family and culture of her own. Jake is a rumpled, stretchy, pancake-obsessed former criminal who naps in the sun. On paper they should not fit, and part of what makes the pairing work is that Jake does not try to become more than he is to deserve her, and she does not ask him to. He loves her as himself, with all his laziness and all his goofiness intact, and she loves that self, not some improved version of it she is waiting for him to grow into. There is a real security in the way Jake loves, an absence of the anxious performing that so many relationships run on, and it comes straight out of his larger philosophy. A creature that is this at peace with himself does not need his partner to complete him or fix him or justify him. He is already content. He brings a full self to the love rather than a hungry one, and that changes everything about the shape of it. There is an early episode built around exactly this, one of Jake's insecurities surfacing when he worries about how he measures up, about whether he is enough for someone as magnificent as Lady, and it is one of the few times you see the confident dog genuinely unsure of himself. And what is touching is that the resolution is not Jake becoming grander or more impressive. It is Jake remembering that the relationship was never built on grandeur, that Lady chose him, ordinary stretchy him, and that the insecurity was a story he was telling himself rather than a problem that actually existed. It is the mud puddle instinct again, in a way, the tendency to invent a narrative and then suffer inside it. And love is one of the places Jake has to keep learning to drop the invented story and trust the plain fact of the thing, which is that he is loved, exactly as he is, and does not have to earn it over and over. And then of course, the love becomes a family, and that is where Jake's philosophy meets its single largest test, larger than death, larger than his origin, because children are the one thing you cannot flow around, the one shape you cannot shrug off when it stops being convenient. But before we get to the pups, I want to sit for a second with the simple fact that this most detached, most go-with-the-flow of characters chose to attach himself, permanently, to another being, and then to a whole brood of them. His philosophy is often described as being about letting go, about non-attachment, about not clinging, and you could imagine a version of that philosophy that keeps everyone at arm's length, that stays loose by staying alone. Jake does the opposite. He attaches completely. He loves specific, particular, inconvenient people with his whole heart, and I think that is the correction the show makes, gently but firmly, to any reading of him as a cool, detached mystic. His peace is not the peace of a creature who has withdrawn from love to avoid its pain. It is the harder, better peace of a creature who has loved all the way in, knowing exactly what love costs, knowing that everyone he loves will change and age and eventually be lost, and choosing to love them anyway, fully, without holding any of himself back as insurance. The pups arrive in an episode called Jake the Dad, and the way Adventure Time handles them is one of the strangest and most affecting decisions it ever makes, because it takes the ordinary miracle of becoming a parent and speeds it up until it becomes a kind of grief. Jake and Lady have 5 children. Their names are Charlie and TV and Viola and Jake Jr. and Kim Kil-Wan, and they are a wonderful, chaotic little brood, each with a different look and a different personality, some more rainbow, some more dog. And Jake, the great avoider of responsibility, the champion napper, becomes a father, and for a little while, you get to watch him be tender and clumsy and overwhelmed, in exactly the way new parents are. But then the series does the thing that makes this episode unforgettable. Because the pups are Rainicorn hybrids, they age extraordinarily fast. Within the span of that one episode, they grow. By the end of it, the children already look older than Jake himself, and one of them, Kim Kil-Wan, has grown a full beard. Jake becomes a father and, almost in the same breath, watches his children pass him by in age, watches them become adults while he is still figuring out how to be their dad. I do not think there is a more honest picture of parenthood anywhere in this show, and it is delivered through cartoon logic, through the joke of babies who grow up in an afternoon, because that is exactly how it feels, for real parents, in the slow version. You blink, and they are walking. You blink again, and they are taller than you. The years that feel so long while you are inside them collapse, in memory, into an afternoon. And one day you look up, and the small creature you were carrying is a grown person with a beard and a life and opinions about you. Adventure Time just takes that feeling and makes it literal, compresses the decades into minutes, so that Jake experiences in one episode the entire vertiginous rush of watching your children outgrow you. And it is played partly for laughs, but underneath the laughs it aches, because it is true. And this is where it tests his philosophy, in a way nothing else quite does. Jake is the great non-clinger, the creature who lets forms go, who does not grasp, who flows. But children are the hardest thing in the world to not cling to. Every instinct of a parent is to hold on, to keep them small, to keep them close, to freeze the good years and never let them end. Jake does not get that option. His children age past him almost immediately, and he has to do the hardest version of his own core practice, which is to love a thing completely and let it change completely at the same time, to hold on with his whole heart and open his hand at the same moment. He does not get to be the dad of small children for long. He has to become, almost at once, the dad of adults, and then a grandfather. Because the pups have their own children fast too. Kim Kil-Wan has a daughter, Bronwyn, and a wife, Pat. Charlie has a son, Gibbon. Within the run of a show that is nominally about 2 kids going on adventures, Jake becomes a patriarch almost without noticing, a grandfather to a growing line, the old root of a family tree that keeps branching faster than he can keep track of. There is a real melancholy in this, and the show does not hide it. One of the more poignant threads involving the pups is that they grow up and, being adults, they do not simply stay adoring children forever. They have their own ideas about who their father is, and some of those ideas are not flattering. Kim Kil-Wan in particular grows into a serious, business-minded adult who looks at his father's endless, lazy adventuring and sees not a free spirit, but an irresponsible man. And there is a whole storyline built around the tension between them, between Jake's philosophy of ease and his son's belief that a life should be built and managed and made secure. Your children grow up and they judge you. They see the life you chose and they measure it against the life they would have chosen. And sometimes they find you wanting. And Jake, who has spent the whole series being effortlessly, charmingly right about how to live, suddenly has a grown son telling him, essentially, that his whole approach to existence is a failure of responsibility. That is a hard thing for the story to do to its most beloved philosophy, and I respect that it does it, that it does not let Jake's way of living go unchallenged by the people it most affected, because that is the cost of Jake's freedom, and Adventure Time is honest enough to name it. A creature who flows, who does not build, who does not grasp or accumulate or secure, is a wonderful creature to be, and it is not always a wonderful thing to be the child of. Finn benefited from Jake's looseness because Finn needed a guide who would let him grow. But a child sometimes needs a wall more than a river, needs the solid, dependable thing more than the flowing, adaptable thing, and Jake's children got a river for a father, endlessly loving, endlessly present in spirit, but not always the fixed, reliable structure a young life leans on. The philosophy that makes Jake so at peace is the same philosophy that makes him, at times, a frustrating parent, and the show lets both of those be true at once, which is the only honest way to tell it. And yet, when it matters, when there is a true crisis, when Warren Ampersand comes for the pups intending to do to them what he did to his other children, it is Jake who stands between his family and the thing that made him. The river becomes a wall, in the one moment a wall is needed. So the picture is not that Jake fails as a father, it is that his fathering looks like nothing, looks like ease and absence and letting go, right up until the second it is required to become fierce, and then it does, completely. That is the whole shape of him. He looks like he is not doing anything, he looks like he does not care about outcomes, and then the storm actually arrives and you find out he was holding the wall up the entire time. I have been circling the darker parts of Jake this whole time, touching them and moving on, and now I want to stop and actually look at them, because a philosophy of Jake that only tells you the flattering half is not worth falling asleep to. So let me say the thing plainly. Before Jake was a hero, before any of the adventuring with Finn, Jake was a criminal. Not a reformed rascal with a heart of gold in the storybook sense, but an actual successful criminal who led his own gang. The show drops this into his history without much fanfare, the way it drops the worm in the viola as simply a true fact about who he is, and it never fully erases it. There are episodes that reach back into that past, that show you the kind of company he kept and the kind of things he did, and the striking thing is how little shame he seems to carry about it. Jake does not spend the series atoning for a wicked youth. He just grew out of it, more or less, the way you grow out of a phase, and he carries the skills and the instincts of it into his new life without much apparent contradiction. And I think that is important, because it complicates the serene sage picture in a way the series clearly wants complicated. Jake's peace is not the peace of a pure soul who never did wrong. It is the peace of a creature who has done plenty of wrong, who has lived on the other side of the law, who knows exactly how easy it is to take what you want and cut the corner and let someone else pay for it, and who is at ease anyway. His morality, when he has one, is not built on rules. He does not do the right thing because a law or a commandment tells him to. He does the right thing when he does it out of loyalty and love for the specific people he cares about, and outside that circle his ethics can get pretty loose. He will lie to get out of trouble. He will take what is not his if it seems harmless enough. He will give advice that serves his own comfort, dressed up as wisdom. The same looseness that lets him flow with the world so gracefully is also a looseness about right and wrong, and the story is honest enough to let you see that these are the same trait, that you cannot have Jake's ease without also having Jake's slipperiness. There is a whole strain of the character that is, frankly, a bit of a con artist. Watch enough of the show and you notice how often Jake's schemes are really just him trying to get something for nothing. Some shortcut to the treasure that skips the honest work, some clever angle that usually backfires and lands them both in worse trouble than if he had just done the straightforward thing. His confidence, which is one of his most charming qualities, is also the engine of a lot of bad decisions, because he is so sure that it will all work out, so allergic to worry, that he does not stop to check whether the plan is actually good. Optimism and laziness braid together in him into a kind of magical thinking, a belief that things will be fine because things are usually fine for him, and when that belief meets a situation that actually requires care and effort, it fails, and someone, often Finn, has to clean up the mess. But there is a deeper thing worth being fair to here, because I do not think Adventure Time includes the criminal past just to knock him down a peg. I think it is making a real argument about where a certain kind of wisdom comes from. Jake is not wise despite his shady history. He is partly wise because of it. A creature who has lived outside the rules, who has seen how arbitrary a lot of them are, who has survived by his wits in a world that was not gentle to him, learns things that the sheltered and the upright never learn. He learns that most of what people panic about does not matter. He learns that you can lose everything and be fine, because he has lost things and been fine. He learns not to take the official story too seriously, because he has been on the wrong side of the official story, and knows it is just a story. His nonchalance in the face of danger, his refusal to be impressed by authority or frightened by consequences, all of it is partly the residue of a life lived on the margins. and it is exactly that residue that makes him such a steadying presence when everything is falling apart. The former criminal is calm in the disaster, because the former criminal has been in disasters before and knows they end. So the flaw and the gift are the same substance seen from two sides. The looseness that makes him morally unreliable is the looseness that makes him spiritually free. The confidence that leads him into dumb schemes is the confidence that lets him accept his own death with a shrug. The refusal to worry that makes him a sometimes negligent friend is the refusal to worry that makes him the one person you want beside you when the sky is actually falling. You do not get to keep the good half and discard the bad half. They come together. They are one trait wearing two faces. And the honest thing the series does is refuse to separate them. Refuse to give you a Jake who is wise and also perfectly good, because no such creature exists, in cartoons or anywhere else. The people who are most at peace are very often the people who have made peace with their own capacity for doing harm, and Jake is one of those. He is not innocent. He never was. His serenity is not the serenity of someone who has never sinned. It is the much more useful and much more believable serenity of someone who has sinned and survived it and forgiven himself and moved on without pretending it did not happen. And that self-forgiveness is, I think, the quiet engine under a lot of his charm. Jake does not hate himself. He does not lie awake cataloging his failures, does not carry a heavy sack of guilt everywhere he goes, does not perform contrition to prove he is good. He did what he did, he is who he is, and he has decided, with a completeness most of us cannot manage, that this is acceptable, that he is allowed to exist and be happy despite an imperfect record. There is something almost scandalous in it, in how easily he lets himself off the hook. And there are moments the show suggests he lets himself off too easily. But there is also something to learn from it, because so many people are frozen by the opposite problem, so trapped in shame over things they cannot change, that they cannot be present for the life in front of them. Jake is never trapped there. Whatever he did, it is done, and the pancakes are warm, and his brother is here, and the afternoon is good, and a creature who can actually believe all of that at once, without the past reaching up to spoil it, has figured out something that a lot of blameless, miserable people never do. Which brings us to the hardest thing Jake ever has to accept. Harder than his own death. Harder than his children outgrowing him. And that is the truth about where he came from, and what he is made of. I told you earlier about the birth, about the bite and the growth on Joshua's head, about him watching it happen when he traveled through time. But that was only the beginning of the answer. The rest of it comes in the final season, in an episode called Jake the Star Child. And it is where the creature who bit his father finally steps out of the shadows and introduces himself. And his name is Warren Ampersand. Warren is an extra-dimensional shapeshifter, a being from somewhere else entirely, and he is dying. And he comes to Jake with what looks like the gentlest possible face. He does not arrive as a monster. He arrives as a long-lost father, warm and grand and full of affection. And he sweeps Jake away to his home world and shows him wonders. He tells Jake that he has watched over him for years, from a distance, that he is proud of him, that they are the same kind of creature, and most seductively of all, he shows Jake a museum, an entire museum built in Jake's honor, filled with Jake's image, a monument to a son, a father supposedly cherished. For a creature who spent his whole life believing his powers came from a mud puddle, who never had a real explanation for why he could stretch and shift and become anything, this is an overwhelming offer. Here, at last, is the answer. Here is where you come from. Here is the parent who made you and the world you belong to, and the proof, in a whole museum, that you were loved all along. And it is a lie. It is the cruelest kind of lie, because it is wrapped around a true fact. Warren really is his biological parent. The powers really do come from him. But Warren did not bring Jake to his world out of love. He brought Jake there to absorb his powers and kill him, which is exactly what he had done to his other children, of whom there were many. Warren makes offspring, lets them grow, lets them ripen into their power, and then harvests them, drains them, kills them, and takes what they became back into himself. The museum was not a monument to love. It was a slaughterhouse dressed as a shrine, and the mechanism is this precise, horrible detail that Jake's belt, the belt he wears, is a conduit, a channel that funnels his power out of him and into Warren's own belt, siphoning the son to feed the dying father. And worse than all of it, once Warren was done with Jake, he intended to do the same thing to Jake's children next, to the pups, to harvest the whole line, So the being who gave Jake his gift is the being who eats his children to survive. The magic that lets him make ladders for Finn and become a brick in a storm and hold his whole family safe comes from a world-eating monster who wanted to devour him and his kids. That is what Jake has to hold. That is the truth under the mud puddle. And the way he meets it is, once again, the whole of his character in a single act. He does not surrender to it, does not let the horror of his origin unmake him, does not decide that because he came from a monster he must be one. He fights. He masters, in that confrontation, a depth of his own power he had never reached before, precisely because the fight forces him to, and he defeats Warren, and he throws him into a black hole, ending, or seeming to end, the creature that made him and wanted to unmake him. Now I have to be accurate here, because the story does not let this be a clean victory. Throwing Warren into a black hole looked like the end of him, but a world-eating thing from another dimension is not the kind of enemy you can ever be sure stays dead. His very last words, as he fell away, hinted that he was not so much dying as slipping sideways into another reality, going, as he put it, four-dimensional. So I am not going to tell you that Jake killed his father and closed the book, because the story never quite confirms it. What Jake actually did was survive the monster, protect his children from it, and refuse to let its nature become his nature, and none of that required Warren to be permanently gone. The point was never that Jake destroyed the source of his darkness. The point is that he faced it, refused it, and kept being gentle anyway. Because that is the real philosophical weight of the whole Warren arc. Jake cannot unknow any of this now. Once he has stood in that museum and understood what it was, once he has felt his own power channeled toward his father's death machine, he can never go back to being the dog who thought he came from a puddle. His arc is not about reversing the truth. It is about accepting it, about living as a creature who is part monster, part world eater, part alien, and choosing, every single day after, to be the ladder and the boat and the brick and the loving father instead. The gift and the curse are the same gift. The stretch that makes him wonderful is the stretch that came from a killer, and Jake decides, with his whole being, that where a thing comes from does not have to determine what it becomes, that he can hold the monster's power in his body and turn it, deliberately, toward tenderness. That is not a small idea to hand to children. It is one of the largest ideas there is. The idea that you are not doomed to become the thing that made you, that origin is not destiny, that a creature born from a wound and powered by a predator can still, by choosing it over and over, be good. Jake never says it that grandly. He would probably just shrug and go make some pancakes. But it is written into everything he does after he meets his father, this quiet insistence that he gets to decide what his inheritance means. If Jake has a religion, it is not Taoism, and it is not hedonism, whatever I have made of those threads. If Jake has a religion, it is Finn. The center of his entire life, the thing every one of his other principles finally bends toward, is his brother. And I want to be exact about what that relationship is, because it is easy to skate over. Finn is a human, the last human for much of Adventure Time, an orphan, and Jake is a magic dog, and they are brothers. Not brothers in a loose sense, but brothers in the truest one, because Jake's parents, Joshua and Margaret, took the human baby in and raised him alongside their own puppy, so that Finn and Jake grew up in the same house, under the same roof, loved by the same parents. Jake is older, and Jake was there first, and in a real sense, Jake helped raise Finn, was the big brother and the guide and the constant companion from Finn's earliest memory. Everything Finn knows about how to be brave, how to be kind, how to keep going, he learned at least partly from watching Jake, and everything Jake is steadier and more responsible than he would otherwise be, he is because of Finn. There is a line Jake says, in one form or another, across the whole series, and it is the closest thing he has to a creed. Homies help homies, always. It sounds like a throwaway, a bit of slang, the kind of thing you would put on a poster next to the Pancakes, but it is actually the entire moral philosophy of the character compressed into 4 words, and it is worth taking seriously. Notice what it does not say. It does not say help people when they deserve it. It does not say help people if it is convenient, or if they will help you back, or if they are right, or if the cause is just. It says homies help homies, always, without condition, without calculation, without exception. Jake's ethics, which I told you were loose and unreliable everywhere else, become absolutely rigid at exactly one point, which is loyalty to the people he loves. Outside that circle, he will cut corners and tell lies and take what is not his. Inside it, he is immovable. For Finn, there is nothing he will not do and no cost he will not pay. And that is the fixed star the whole rest of his easygoing, improvisational life orbits around. And I find that a really honest picture of how most decent people actually work, if we are being truthful about ourselves. Very few of us love the whole world evenly. Very few of us are saints who care about a stranger exactly as much as a brother. What most of us have instead is a small circle of people for whom we would do anything, and a much larger world we treat with varying degrees of care and carelessness, and the moral life is mostly about how we handle that gap. Jake does not pretend the gap is not there. He does not perform a universal love he does not feel. He is honest about the fact that his heart has a center, and the center is Finn and his family, and he pours himself into that center completely, rather than spreading himself thin across a love for everyone that would mean nothing. There is something almost Confucian in it, this idea that real virtue starts at home, in the concrete bonds of family and friendship, and radiates outward from there rather than starting as an abstract principle and trying to work its way in. The two of them together are the emotional engine of the whole show, and the reason it works is that the love goes both ways and is not simple. They fight. They annoy each other. Jake's laziness truly frustrates Finn, and Finn's intensity truly wears on Jake, and there are episodes where they hurt each other, where Jake gives Finn advice that is self-serving, where Finn has to grow past his brother's limitations. It is not a saccharine bond. It is a real one, with friction in it, the way real family has friction, and it survives the friction, over and over. Because underneath all of it is that unconditional homies help homies, always. Whatever they do to each other on a Tuesday, when it actually counts, when one of them is in real danger, the other is simply there, without hesitation, without keeping score. That is what makes it a marriage of souls rather than just a friendship. The total absence of conditions at the deepest level, the way each of them is a permanent fact in the other's life rather than a choice that gets re-examined. I have to slip in one word about the wound in it though, because it becomes the whole point later. The trouble with loving one person more than anything in a world where everyone dies is that one of you goes first. Jake is older. Jake is mortal, for all his cosmic experiences, and he ages, and he will die, and Finn will have to live in a world without him, or Jake will have to face the reverse. The entire beautiful structure of their brotherhood is built on top of the one fact neither of them can flow around, which is that it will end, that one day the homie will not be there to help the homie, because one of them will be gone, and the show, being the series, does not look away from that. It builds its saddest and most searching material out of exactly that fact, out of what happens to a love this total when time finally does what time does. But we are not there yet. For now, I just want you to hold the size of it, the fact that under all of Jake's philosophy, under the letting go and the non-attachment and the going with the flow, there is one thing he is attached to with his entire being and will never ever let go of willingly, and that thing is his brother, and everything else he believes has to make room for that. To understand why Jake matters as much as he does, you have to understand the story he is standing in the middle of. Because Adventure Time is, underneath the candy colors and the silly voices, one of the saddest stories ever aimed at children. The land of Ooh, this bright playground where the adventures happen, is not a fantasy planet. It is Earth, our Earth, 1,000 years or so after a nuclear war they call the Mushroom War, a catastrophe that nearly wiped out humanity and left the ruins of our own world scattered across the landscape, the broken cars and the shattered buildings, and the fallout that twisted the survivors into the strange magical creatures that now fill the place. Every candy kingdom and every silly monster is growing out of the grave of the world we know. The whole setting is an aftermath. The whole show is what came after the end of everything. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it, and it changes the color of every frame, and the characters carry that sadness in their bones. There is the story of Simon, a kind and gentle man who found a magic crown that gave him power and took his mind in exchange, who slowly lost himself, lost his memories, lost the woman he loved, and became a lonely, addled figure who cannot remember who he used to be, protecting a little girl in the ruins as his own sanity dissolved. There is Marceline, that little girl, who grew up half-abandoned in the wreckage of the world, immortal, watching everyone she loves age and die around her across centuries. There is the Lich, the pure embodiment of death and annihilation, whose only desire is to end all life, a shadow that predates the show by eons. These are not light characters. Their stories are about memory and loss, and the slow, unbearable grief of loving things that do not last. And Adventure Time tells those stories with a tenderness and a seriousness that took a lot of people completely by surprise, because they came in expecting a goofy cartoon about a boy and his dog. And in the middle of all that sorrow stands Jake, and this is the thing I most want you to see about him. That the series deliberately places its most sorrowful material right next to its most contented character. Jake is not sad. In a world built entirely out of loss, surrounded by characters drowning in their own histories, Jake is at peace. He is the one who is not haunted. And I do not think that is because Jake is shallow, because he does not feel the weight of things. I think it is because Jake has, by whatever accident of temperament and hard living, arrived at the one stance that actually answers all that grief, which is acceptance. Marceline suffers because she cannot let go of the people time takes from her. Simon suffers because he cannot get back the self he lost. The lich is suffering itself, the raw fact of annihilation given a face. And Jake, looking at the same impermanent world, the same certainty of loss, the same guarantee that everything ends, simply does not fight it. He accepts that things end. He accepts that he will end. And so the very thing that tortures everyone else slides off him, not because he feels it less, but because he has stopped resisting it. That is why the show gives its deepest wisdom to the goofy dog instead of to its tragic figures, and I think that is a deliberate and beautiful choice. It would have been easy and false to make the wisest character the gravest one, to put the truth about loss in the mouth of Simon or Marceline, the ones who have suffered most. But suffering does not automatically make you wise. Very often it just makes you stuck. The ones who have been hurt worst are frequently the ones least able to let go, precisely because the wound is so deep. So the story does something braver. It puts the real answer to grief in its least likely vessel, in the lazy, greedy, formerly criminal pancake dog. Because the answer to grief is not more grief, it is acceptance. And acceptance is exactly the thing Jake has and the tragic characters lack. He is the counterweight. He is the ballast that keeps the whole sad ship from capsizing. Without Jake, Adventure Time would be almost unbearably melancholy. With him, the melancholy has a floor under it, a warm, steady presence saying, in effect, yes, it all ends, and that is all right. And look, the afternoon is still good. And there is a quiet tragedy in Jake's role too, which Adventure Time only lets you feel near the very end, that the one character most at peace with impermanence is the one whose impermanence hurts the others most. Jake can accept his own death easily. What he cannot control is what his death does to Finn, to Lady, to his children, to everyone whose peace depended on his. His acceptance is his own. He cannot hand it to the people who love him. So the creature who taught a whole cast how to be at ease with loss becomes in the end the loss they have to be at ease with, and whether they can do what he did, whether they can accept losing him the way he accepted losing everything, is the question the show leaves hanging over its final movement. He spent his life being the answer to everyone else's grief, and then he became the grief. And the series asks, gently, whether the lesson took. Let me pull back from the heavy end of things for a while and talk about Jake the artist, because it is a side of him that is easy to overlook, and it tells you something about his whole approach to being alive. Jake plays the viola, not the violin, the flashy one that gets the melody and the solos, but the viola, the larger, lower, warmer instrument that usually lives in the middle of the music, filling in the harmony, the part nobody in the audience is consciously listening for and everybody would miss if it vanished. And I do not think the choice of instrument is an accident, because that is exactly Jake's role in every group he is in. He is the middle voice. He is the warm supporting line underneath the melody that Finn carries. He is not there to be the star. He is there to make the whole thing sound full and right, and he seems to want it that way. To be perfectly happy holding the harmony while someone else takes the tune. And living inside that viola, of course, is a worm named Shelby. And later there is more than one worm, and the story never once explains this or apologizes for it. A worm lives in the instrument. Sometimes Shelby has his own little storylines. It is the kind of detail that could only exist in a show this relaxed about its own logic, and it fits Jake perfectly, because Jake is a creature who makes room. His instrument is not a precious, protected, keep your hands off it object. It is a place a worm can live. His art is not a sacred discipline he guards jealously. It is just another comfortable corner of a life that has room in it for small, strange creatures to move in and stay. There is something lovely and telling in that. The way Jake's most artistic possession is also somebody's home. The way he does not draw a hard line between his creative life and the ordinary mess of living things around him. The way Jake makes music is the way Jake does everything, which is by feel, by improvisation, without a lot of rigor. He is a jazz creature. He does not read the sheet and execute it precisely. He finds the groove and rides it, adds a flourish when he feels one coming, lets the mistakes become part of the piece. And that improvisational looseness, which I talked about with his shapeshifting, is really the same faculty pointed at sound instead of shape. A creature who can become a ladder or a boat in an instant, without a plan, trusting that the right form will arrive, is exactly the kind of creature who plays music by ear and by mood rather than by score. His body is improvisation, and his art is improvisation, and his whole philosophy is improvisation. This deep trust that you do not need to plan the next moment. You only need to be loose enough and present enough to meet it when it comes. And then of course there is the Pancake song, the Bacon Pancakes tune, which is the smallest possible piece of art, and maybe the purest example of Jake as an artist, because it is a song about the thing he is doing while he sings it. He is making pancakes, and so he sings about making pancakes, turning an ordinary domestic chore into a little piece of music, into a moment of joy that did not need to exist, and that he created out of nothing simply because he felt like it. That is what art is, at its root, before it becomes grand and serious and professional. It is the impulse to make the ordinary moment sing, to add a melody to the work of the hands, to turn breakfast into a celebration, for no reason other than that you are alive, and the batter is bubbling, and a little song wants to come out. Jake does that constantly, without calling it art, without any sense that it is a special or elevated act. He just sings while he cooks, hums while he walks, plays his viola in the evening, and treats the making of small, beautiful things as a natural part of being awake in the world. I think that is why so many people feel like they know Jake even if they have only seen a handful of clips, because the Bacon Pancake song escaped the show and became its own thing, a little earworm that captures the entire spirit of the character in 20 seconds. It is warm, it is silly, it is about food, it is completely unbothered, and it turns a chore into a joy. If you wanted to explain Jake's whole philosophy to someone who had never heard of Adventure Time, and you only had one artifact to do it with, you could do a lot worse than that little song, because everything is in it: the contentment, the presence, the refusal to treat any moment as too small to be celebrated, the deep, unhurried gladness of a creature who has figured out that a good life is not made of enormous triumphs, but of 1,000 tiny songs sung over 1,000 ordinary tasks, and that if you can learn to sing while you cook, you have learned most of what there is to learn. Now for a while, Adventure Time takes Jake to a much larger stage than his kitchen, and I want to spend some time up there, because how Jake behaves at the scale of the whole universe is one of the more revealing things about him. There is a being in this world named Prismo, and Prismo is a wishmaster. He lives in a place called the Time Room, a strange pink space outside of ordinary reality, and he grants wishes, but he grants them the way a very old story grants them, with all the literal, loophole-ridden, be careful what you ask for danger that wishes carry in the oldest tales. If you wish for something, Prismo gives you exactly what you said, not what you meant, and the gap between the two is where all the trouble lives. And there is a wonderful twist to what Prismo even is, because Prismo turns out not to be a solid person at all. He is a projection, a dream being, the dream of a sleeping old man somewhere, so that if the sleeper ever wakes or dies, Prismo simply ceases, blinks out like a dream at morning. He is a wish granted by the universe that is itself only a dream. Jake spends real time in this cosmic space, most notably in a 5th season episode that carries his own name, Jake the Dog, where he ends up in the time room watching the consequences of a wish ripple out across reality. And the larger story around it is enormous, about as big as Adventure Time ever gets. The Lich, the embodiment of death, gets a wish, and the Lich wishes for the extinction of all life, the ending of everything, which is the only thing death ever wants. And Finn, to counter it, wishes that the Lich had never existed, and that wish does not simply undo the danger, it throws Finn sideways into an entirely different timeline, a world where a different history unfolded, because a wish that big does not just erase a villain, it unravels and reweaves the whole fabric of what happened. This is the machinery of the universe at its most naked, wishes-altering reality, timeline splitting, the fundamental rules of existence being bent by beings powerful enough to bend them. And what does Jake do? Standing in the middle of all this cosmic power, he mostly stays Jake. That is the astonishing thing. Placed in the time room, at the console of reality, hanging out with a wish-granting dream being, while the fate of all existence gets decided, Jake does not become solemn or overwhelmed or self-important. He treats Prismo like a buddy, a cool guy to hang out with. He is relaxed at the scale of the universe, in exactly the way he is relaxed in his own kitchen. The magnitude of the setting does not change his temperament at all, and I think that is deeply intentional, because it dramatizes something the series believes about him, that his peace is not a small local thing that only works when the stakes are low. His peace scales. It works in the kitchen, and it works at the console of creation. A lot of us are calm about small things and terrified of large ones, at ease with a quiet afternoon and undone by anything cosmic or final. Jake is the same size on both. The universe does not intimidate him any more than a rainstorm does, because his acceptance is not about the size of the thing, it is about his stance toward all things, and that stance does not flinch when the thing gets infinite. There is a real philosophical claim buried in that, and it is one of the things the show seems proudest of. The claim is that the right way to be does not depend on the scale of what you are facing. The virtues that let you enjoy a pancake are the same virtues that let you stand unafraid at the edge of reality, because they are not really about pancakes or reality, they are about how you hold whatever is in front of you. Presence, acceptance, non-attachment, a refusal to grasp, these work at every magnitude, and a creature who has actually mastered them, the way Jake mostly has, carries the same easy grace into the time room that he carries into breakfast. The friends who are impressive in a crisis and hollow in ordinary life, or comfortable in ordinary life and shattered by a crisis, have not found the thing Jake found, which is a way of being that does not care how big the moment is. And there is a gentle joke in it too, in the fact that Prismo, this cosmic wish-granting being, and Jake, this lazy pancake dog, become genuine friends, become buddies who just like each other's company, because of course they would. Prismo is relaxed, playful, a little lazy himself, a being who grants the wishes that shape reality, and does it with a laid-back cool that mirrors Jake almost exactly. The show seems to be saying that when you get all the way up to the beings who run the universe, they are not stern cosmic judges, they are chill. The management of all existence, in Adventure Time's imagination, is done by easygoing dream creatures who would rather hang out, and Jake fits right in among them, not because he is powerful, but because he is already, temperamentally, one of them, already living the way the cosmic beings live, relaxed at the scale of everything. He did not have to travel to the time room to learn how to be there. He was already there, in spirit, back in his kitchen, singing about pancakes. For all of that cosmic ease, though, the story subjects Jake's philosophy to a serious cross-examination, and the place it presses hardest is the question of responsibility. Because there is a real objection to the whole Jake way of living, and Adventure Time is smart enough to put that objection right in front of him and make him answer it. The objection is simple. It is very nice to be at peace, to flow, to let go, to enjoy the present and not grasp at outcomes. But the world runs on things that require exactly the opposite. It runs on people who plan, who build, who take on obligations and see them through, who sacrifice today's comfort for tomorrow's security, who do the boring necessary work that ease would rather skip. A whole society of Jakes, delightful as each one would be, would have no roofs and no bridges and no anything, because the roofs and the bridges get built by the people who chose duty over the pancake, and it is Jake's own son who forces this on him. There is a storyline built around the deed to the tree fort, the home Finn and Jake live in, and Kim Kil-won, the serious, business-minded son, quietly buys that deed and begins charging his own father rent. It is a strange, cold, and secretly loving act, because the son is not doing it out of greed. He is doing it to teach his father a lesson, to force Jake to confront the fact that a life of pure ease has left him owning nothing, securing nothing, providing nothing solid for the people who depend on him. The son looks at his father's beautiful, relaxed, improvisational existence and sees, underneath the charm, a kind of failure, a refusal to grow up, and he decides that the only way to reach a creature who flows around every lesson is to hit him with a bill. And the phrase that hangs over this whole thread, the idea Jake has to swallow, is that responsibility demands sacrifice. That being responsible for other people, really responsible, means giving things up. means the comfort has to sometimes lose, so the duty can win. Now I paraphrase that idea, rather than pin it to an exact quote, because the precise wording is not something I can stand behind, but the shape of it is unmistakable in the show, and it is the single hardest thing Jake's philosophy ever has to metabolize. Because it is true. It is a real limit on his whole way of being, and the series does not let him wriggle out of it with a clever shrug. Ease is a wonderful thing to have, and a terrible thing to build a family's security on. The river is a beautiful way to move through the world, and a poor way to be a roof over someone's head. And Jake, to his real credit, does not simply reject the lesson. He takes it in. He accepts that his son has a point, that there are demands adulthood makes that cannot be flowed around, that at some stage loving people means doing the unglamorous, effortful, sacrificial work of actually providing for them, not just being warm and present and fun. This is really the story of Adventure Time's later seasons in miniature, because the whole back half of the story is about growing up, about the characters aging out of the pure, open-ended adventure of childhood and into the heavier, more complicated business of being adults with responsibilities and consequences. Finn grows up over the run of the show, visibly, painfully, from a little boy into a young man who has to make real moral choices. And Jake, in his own way, has to grow up too, even though he was already an adult. Has to grow from the kind of adult who is essentially a large, happy child into the kind of adult who understands that other lives lean on his, and that leaning requires him to be, at least sometimes, a fixed and reliable thing, rather than a shape-shifting one. And what I find moving is that Jake manages this without abandoning who he is. He does not become grim and dutiful. He does not trade his whole philosophy for a spreadsheet and a mortgage. He finds, instead, a way to fold responsibility into ease, rather than replacing ease with responsibility. A way to take the lesson seriously, without letting it kill whatever made him Jake in the first place. He learns that you can love the present moment and still plan for the next one, that you can be at peace and still show up for your obligations, that acceptance of how things are does not have to mean passivity about how things should be. The mature Jake is not a Jake who stopped flowing. He is a Jake who learned that sometimes the kindest shape you can take is the solid one, the wall instead of the river, and that choosing that shape when it is needed is not a betrayal of his philosophy, but the completion of it. Wu Wei was never supposed to mean doing nothing. It was always supposed to mean doing the right thing at the right time, without forcing it, and sometimes the right thing at the right time is to pick up the burden and carry it. I have been dropping the names of traditions all through this, the Taoism, the Buddhism, the bit of Epicurus, and I want to stop and be honest about what that kind of reading is and is not, because it would be easy to overdo it. There is an actual book, published in a series that pairs pop culture with philosophy, called Adventure Time and Philosophy, subtitled The Handbook for Heroes, edited by a philosopher named Nicholas Michaud, and it collects a couple dozen essays that read Adventure Time through thinkers like Plato and Nietzsche and Baudrillard, and yes, through Taoist ideas like the one about effortless action I described earlier. So I am not making up the idea that this show invites philosophical reading. Serious people have taken it seriously, in print, and Jake in particular keeps showing up in those essays as a figure of a certain kind of Eastern-influenced wisdom, the go-with-the-flow sage, the one who has let go of striving. But there is a trap in this kind of talk, and it is worth stepping around, the trap being that you can make Jake sound like he read the books. He did not. Jake is not a Taoist, in the sense that he studied the Tao Te Ching and adopted its principles. He is not a Buddhist in the sense that he took vows and practiced meditation and worked through the teachings on impermanence and non-attachment. He is a cartoon dog who likes naps and pancakes and never, as far as we know, cracked a single work of philosophy in his life. What the traditions give us is not an account of what Jake believes. They give us a vocabulary for what Jake does, a set of old, careful words for a way of being that Jake arrived at by pure instinct and hard living and temperament. The philosophers spent centuries writing down, with enormous rigor, the thing that Jake simply is without trying. And I actually think that is the more interesting relationship and the more hopeful one, because if the only way to reach Jake's peace were to study the way the philosophers studied, then peace would belong to scholars, to the people with the time and the education and the discipline to work through the texts. But Jake is proof, fictional proof, but proof of a possibility, that you can arrive at the deepest insights of the contemplative traditions without any of the apparatus, that a creature who never read a word can embody Wu Wei more fully than a professor who has taught it for 30 years. The wisdom is not locked inside the books. The books are just maps of a territory that some people wander into on their own. Jake wandered in. He got to non-attachment by being a creature who was never very attached to begin with. He got to acceptance of death by being too relaxed to be afraid of it. He got to living in the present by lacking the anxious forward-looking machinery that keeps the rest of us trapped in the future. His path was not study. His path was temperament, and luck, and a certain kind of hard early life that burned the fear out of him. This is why I resist the version of the philosophy of Jake that turns him into a wise old master, robes and beard and cryptic sayings. That version flatters him and misses him. Jake is not a master. He is something more encouraging than a master. He is an ordinary creature, flawed, lazy, greedy, a former criminal with questionable judgment, who nonetheless stumbled into a way of holding his life that the greatest philosophers would recognize and admire. The point is not that Jake is exceptional. The point is that the wisdom is available, that it does not require you to be a saint or a scholar, that it can live inside a goofy, imperfect creature who is bad at a lot of things, because it is not really a matter of knowledge at all. It is a matter of stance, of how you meet the moment in front of you, and that is available to anyone, in any life, at any level of education or virtue. So when I read Jake through these traditions, I am not saying he is secretly a philosopher. I am saying the philosophers were secretly describing Jake, describing the ordinary miracle of a creature at peace, and that the value of the traditions is that they let us see clearly what he is doing, name it, understand it, maybe even learn a little of it ourselves. The map is useful, but Jake is the territory, and he never needed the map, and there is something profoundly reassuring in that, in the idea that the destination all those careful thinkers were pointing toward is a place you can also just wander into by being a certain kind of open, unhurried, unafraid creature, singing to yourself while you make breakfast, entirely unaware that you have arrived somewhere the sages spent their whole lives trying to reach. I have spent a lot of this talking about the monster Jake was born from, and it would be unfair to leave out the family he was raised by, because if Warren Ampersand explains where his power came from, Joshua and Margaret explain where his goodness came from, and that second question is the more important one. Joshua was a dog, a detective, tough and principled in the hard-boiled way, and Margaret was his wife, and together they raised Jake, and they also took in the human baby Finn and raised him as their own. So the household Jake grew up in was a household defined by exactly the thing Warren was not, which is care for creatures who are not your own blood. Warren makes children in order to consume them. Joshua and Margaret took in a child who was not even their species and loved him as a son. Those are the two poles Jake exists between, the parent who devours and the parents who adopt. And everything good in Jake comes from the second pole. And there is a beautiful, almost secret argument in that arrangement about where a person really comes from. Because biologically, genetically, in the blood, Jake is Warren's. His powers, his shape-shifting, the alien stuff woven into his cells, all of that is the monster's. But who he is, his character, his warmth, his loyalty, his easy goodness, none of that came from Warren at all. That came from being raised by a gruff, loving detective and his kind wife in a house where taking in strays was simply what you did. Jake is living proof that you are made far more by who raised you than by who bore you. That nurture can completely outrun nature, that a creature can carry a world-eater's genes and a good dog's soul at the same time, and that it is the soul, the part that was given to him by love rather than by biology, that ends up being who he actually is. The mud puddle was never real, and the monster was real but did not define him, and the thing that defined him was a family that chose him. He also has a brother from that family, a brother by upbringing, named Jermaine, and the relationship there is quieter and thornier than his bond with Finn, and I think it is worth a moment because it shows a less flattering, more human side of Jake. Jermaine grew up in the same house, another of Joshua and Margaret's sons, and where Finn and Jake became inseparable, Jake and Jermaine drifted, the way real siblings sometimes do, into a relationship full of unspoken tension and old competition, and things never quite said. There is a sense that Jermaine carried more of the weight of the family, more of the seriousness and the grief, while Jake got to float off into his carefree adventures, and that this created a distance between them, a low-grade resentment on one side and a low-grade guilt on the other. It is the family relationship Jake handled worst, the one his easygoing philosophy served least well, because you cannot flow your way through a sibling who needed more from you than you gave. And I appreciate that the series includes this, because it is another place where it refuses to let Jake be perfect. His warmth, real as it is, was not distributed evenly. He poured himself completely into Finn and into Lady and into his pups, and in doing so, he had less left for Jermaine, and the result was a brother who felt somewhat left behind. The same capacity for total devotion that makes Jake such a good brother to Finn made him, in a way, a worse brother to Jermaine, because devotion that total has to come from somewhere, and the somewhere was partly the attention Jermaine did not get. That is a subtle and adult thing for a cartoon to notice, that even love as good as Jake's has an economy to it, that the intensity he gives to a few is paid for by the thinness of what is left for others, and that his easy nature, which looks like it costs nothing, cost his other brother quite a lot. But the family as a whole, Joshua and Margaret and the home they built, is the foundation under everything Jake became, and the show returns to it with real tenderness, especially once Jake starts investigating his own origins and has to sort out which of his fathers is which. In the end, he has, in a sense, 3 parental forces. He has Warren, the biological monster, who gave him his power and wanted his life. He has Joshua, who legally and lovingly fathered him and whose head he was born from, a strange and tender fact all its own. And he has Margaret, who raised him with a mother's love, though she did not bear him. And Jake, faced with this complicated inheritance, does what he does with everything. He accepts all of it, holds the monster and the detective and the kind mother all at once, and decides that the ones who loved him are his real parents, and the one who made him is just a fact about his cells. That is, when you think about it, the healthiest possible response to a complicated family, to let the people who showed up be the ones who count, and to let biology be merely biology. The show ends, as it had to, and the way it ends says something about Jake's whole philosophy that I do not think you can get anywhere else in the series. The finale is called Come Along With Me, a long special that closes out the story, and at its center is the largest threat the story ever produced, a being called Golb. Golb is not a villain in the ordinary sense, not a schemer with a plan, because Golb is chaos itself, entropy given a form, the raw force of disorder and unmaking that stands opposed to all order and all creation. He comes from an unknown dimension, and when he is accidentally summoned into the middle of a war, he begins to unravel reality itself, and there is no fighting him the way you fight a monster, because he is not a monster. He is the dissolution that monsters and heroes and everything else eventually dissolve into. And the crucial fact about Golb, the one that matters most for a video about Jake, is how he is finally answered. Golb is weak to music. Chaos, the force of pure disorder, is vulnerable to song, to harmony, to the deliberate ordered beauty of voices coming together. And so the thing that turns the tide against the unmaking of everything is not a weapon and not a spell but a song, the characters singing together, order and love and melody pushed back against entropy. Think about what that means for a creature like Jake, the improvising viola player, the dog who sings about pancakes, the one who turns every ordinary moment into a little tune. The show's ultimate statement about how you face the void, how you push back against the chaos that wants to dissolve everything you love, is that you sing, you make music, you answer disorder with harmony. And Jake has been doing exactly that his entire life, answering the sadness of an impermanent world with small songs. And now it turns out that small songs are the only thing the ultimate darkness cannot stand. Golb is not destroyed, and I want to be accurate about that, because it is important. You do not defeat chaos permanently, you cannot. Chaos is not the kind of thing that stays dead. What happens instead is an act of sacrifice. Betty Groff, a character with her own long and heartbreaking story tied to Simon, uses the ice crown in a wish-granting mode, and her truest wish, the thing she wants more than anything, is to save Simon, and in the working out of that wish, she fuses herself with Golb, becoming a merged being, neutralizing the chaos, not by killing it, but by joining with it, sacrificing her separate self to bind the unmaking. And in the aftermath, Simon, who spent almost the entire series lost inside the Ice King, trapped and mad and grieving without knowing what he grieved, is restored, made himself again, the crown's curse finally lifted. So the ending is not a victory in the clean sense. It is a sacrifice, and a restoration, and a fusion, order and chaos, locked together rather than one destroying the other, which is a far more honest picture of how these things actually go. And through all of it, Adventure Time is making its final argument under its breath. which is that the answer to entropy is not to defeat it, but to keep making beautiful, ordered things in its face anyway. To keep singing even though the song will end. To keep loving even though everything you love will dissolve. To keep building homes even though the storm is coming for all of them. This is the Rabbit from the Brick episode, scaled up to the size of the universe. The rabbit's home is destroyed, and it builds a new one inside the wreckage. Not because the new one will last, it will not, but because building is what you do. Because making order out of chaos is the whole activity of being alive, and you do it knowing it is temporary. You do it as an act of defiance and love against a universe that will eventually take it all back. Jake understood that in miniature, lying in a shack watching a rabbit. The finale just says it at full volume, with the whole cast singing against the end of everything. The finale is also, unmistakably, about growing up and letting go, about the end of childhood and the end of the adventure. And this is where it lands closest to Jake specifically. The show could not go on forever. The boys could not stay boys. The endless open-ended adventure of the early seasons had to give way to endings, to characters moving on, to the world changing and the heroes aging and the story closing. And Jake, of all the characters, is the one best equipped to meet that ending, because letting go is the thing he has always been best at. He does not cling to the adventure the way you might expect a creature to cling to the best years of his life. He lets them be over, the way he lets everything be over, with that same acceptance, that same refusal to grasp at a form once its time has passed. The finale asks everyone to grow up, to accept that the story ends, and Jake, who was never really holding on that tightly to begin with, is ready. He has been ready the whole time. He has been rehearsing this exact letting go, in small ways, in every episode, his whole life. And then, after the show ends, Jake does the thing he had been getting ready for all along. He grows old, and he dies. Not in battle, not dramatically, not at the hands of any villain, but the ordinary way, the way the rabbit's home falls, and the way all homes fall, of old age, gently, in the fullness of a long life. The series itself gives you glimpses of the far future, of the world going on after the heroes, of the characters aging and time rolling forward, and the clear implication, confirmed by what comes later, is that Jake, for all his cosmic adventures and his brushes with the machinery of the universe, was mortal the whole time. He was never going to be the exception. The magic dog with the world eater's power in his cells still ages, still tires, still comes at last to the end that comes for everything, and there is something almost defiantly ordinary about that the series refused to give its most beloved character any escape from the one fact it had been teaching him to accept since the third season. I find that choice moving beyond words, because it would have been so easy to cheat. This is a show with wish-granting beings and immortal characters and cosmic forces. A show where death is a person you can argue with, and reality can be rewritten by a well-phrased wish. It could have found a loophole for Jake. It could have made him immortal, made him ascend, made him the one who gets to stay. Plenty of stories do exactly that for the characters the audience loves most, bend their own rules to spare the favorite. Adventure Time does not. It lets Jake die, of old age, like anyone, because to do otherwise would have been to betray the entire philosophy the character embodies. A Jake who cheated death would be a Jake who clung, who grasped, who made himself the exception, and that is precisely the creature Jake never was. The only ending that is true to him is the ending where he accepts the same fate as everything else, and so that is the ending he gets, and the acceptance he practiced his whole life turns out to have been practice for the real thing after all, and his line does not end with him, which softens it, the way the rabbit rebuilding softens the loss of its home. Jake's children, those fast-growing pups, and their children, go on. The family he made outlives him and keeps branching, and in the far future his descendants become something remarkable, spreading out, becoming a civilization of their own, carrying his blood and his shape out into a future he will never see. So Jake's death is not an ending in the way the Lich wanted endings, not annihilation, not the erasure of everything he was. It is a handing off, a passing of the torch to a line that continues, the individual wave falling back into the ocean while the ocean goes on. That is a very particular way to think about your own death, not as the end of you, but as your return to a larger continuing thing, and it is the way that fits Jake, the creature who never believed that his individual self was the biggest fact about him, who always knew, in his stretching, shape-shifting bones, that he was one temporary form of a much larger and more permanent stuff. There is a real grief in it anyway, and the story does not pretend otherwise, because acceptance is not the same as not caring, and Jake accepting his death does not mean the people who love him accept it easily. That is the wound I pointed at earlier. The fact that the one most at peace with his own ending is the one whose ending devastates the others. Finn has to live in a world without his brother. That is the hardest thing the story ever asks of anyone. Harder than any monster, harder than Golb, and it is the thing the show saves for its very last chapter, told years later, in the story of what happens after Jake is gone. When the brother who was left behind finally comes to the end of his own long life and goes looking, through the afterlife itself, for the dog he never stopped missing. That story is where the whole philosophy of Jake finally pays off, and it pays off not in Jake's own peace, which we always knew he had, but in the question of whether the peace he modeled can survive him, whether the letting go he taught can be practiced by the ones he taught it to, once the thing they have to let go of is Jake himself. That last chapter arrived a few years after Adventure Time ended, in a special called Together Again, one of the 4 Distant Lands specials made for streaming, and it is one of the most emotionally complete pieces of television I have ever seen, and it is entirely about death, so I want to walk through it slowly, because it is where the whole philosophy of Jake comes to rest. The special opens with Finn, but not the young Finn you know. It opens with Finn as an old man, at the very end of his own long life, and then Finn dies, and he wakes up in the afterlife, in a kind of waiting room, where a simulation greets him and begins to feed him his happiest memories, a comfortable illusion designed to keep the newly dead soothed and occupied. And Finn, being Finn, sees through it, refuses the comfortable illusion, and sets off on a journey, because there is only one thing in any afterlife he actually wants, and it is not peace and it is not comfort, it is his brother. He wants Jake. He has been without Jake for the length of a whole human lifetime, and now that he is dead too, he is going to find him. The Afterlife and Adventure Time is structured as a series of dead worlds, 50 of them, arranged in a kind of hierarchy, and where you end up depends on the state of your soul. Finn is assigned to the 37th dead world, which is a respectable place for a good and heroic soul, but Jake is not in the 37th. Jake is in the 50th, the highest one, the elite dead world reserved for the wisest souls in all of existence. And the reason Jake is there, the reason he made it to the very top of the entire afterlife, is the single most perfect joke the series ever told about him, because it is a joke that is also completely true. The prerequisite for entering the 50th dead world, the one condition you must meet to reach the highest place a soul can go, is that you must not want to go there. You must have abandoned the desire to reach it. The moment you crave the 50th dead world, you have disqualified yourself, because the craving is exactly the thing that keeps you out. Only a soul that has let go of the wanting, that has released even the desire for the highest reward, can arrive there. And Jake, of course, sailed right in. I need you to feel how funny and how profound that is at the same time, because it is the whole character in one cosmic punchline. Jake did not meditate his way to the top of the afterlife. He did not strive for enlightenment, did not chase spiritual achievement, did not want the 50th dead world any more than he wanted anything else, which is to say he wanted it lightly, held it loosely, was perfectly content whether he got it or not. And that, precisely that, is why he got it. The dog who was never trying, who never grasped, who was content with a pancake and a nap and never needed to be more than he was, turns out to have been doing the highest spiritual practice there is the entire time, by not practicing it, by simply being a creature who does not cling. Everyone else in that afterlife who wants the 50th dead world is locked out by their wanting. Jake, who never wanted much of anything too badly, strolled in. It is the punchline the whole series had been setting up from the first time we watched him refuse to worry about something, and when it lands as both the funniest and the truest thing the show ever said about him. And there is a darkness woven through the special too, because the afterlife is not running properly. There is a figure called New Death presiding over things, and New Death turns out to be, in a final devastating twist, a puppet of the Lich, the old embodiment of annihilation, who has wormed his way into the machinery of the afterlife and been manipulating the cycle of souls for his own ends. Death and the Lich, the two great embodiments of ending in the whole series, tangled together at the last, with the fate of souls hanging on it. And it is resolved, fittingly, not by Finn or Jake through violence, but through a strange and unexpected turn in which a character called Mr. Fox delivers the final blow and becomes the next death, taking up the office. Because in this world, death is not a thing that ends. It is a role that gets passed on, an office that always needs a holder. The cosmos writes itself. The Lich's grip on the afterlife is broken, and the way is finally clear for the two brothers to be together again, which is the whole point, the thing the title has been promising the whole time. But there is a choice that makes the special more than just a happy reunion, and it is Jake's choice, and it is the last and greatest expression of his philosophy. Because the story reveals that Finn and Jake are not new souls, and not a bond that began in this one life. Their souls have been reincarnated again and again, across many lifetimes, always somehow finding their way back to each other. Their bond is not the accident of one lifetime. It is a permanent feature of the universe, a pair of souls that keep coming back together. And in the afterlife, Jake, who has reached that very summit, who has earned eternal rest and enlightenment, and the end of the whole exhausting cycle of death and rebirth, is offered the thing every spiritual tradition treats as the ultimate goal: release, ascension, the end of returning. And he could take it. He has more than earned it. But it would mean letting Finn go on without him, either into a lesser reward or into another turn of the wheel alone. And Jake chooses Finn. He chooses to leave the 50th dead world, to give up the ultimate enlightenment, to step back into the cycle of death and rebirth, to be born again into a new life and a new world, so that he can be with his brother again. He trades eternal peace for another mortal lifetime, another round of aging and loss and eventual death, because a heaven without Finn is not a heaven he wants. And this is the peace that completes him, that keeps his whole philosophy from being a cold philosophy of detachment, because it turns out there is one thing Jake will not let go of, one attachment he will not release even for the highest reward the universe can offer, and it is love. He mastered non-attachment so completely that he reached the top of the afterlife by not wanting it, and then, at the very summit, he revealed that his non-attachment was never the whole truth about him, that underneath it, load-bearing, permanent, was a love so total he would give up enlightenment itself rather than experience it alone. The letting go was real, but the holding on was realer. And Adventure Time's final word on Jake is that the wisest soul in all of existence looked at eternal peace and chose, instead, to go around one more time, and one more time after that, forever, as long as it meant going around with his brother. I want to bring all of this a little closer to you now, because it is late, and you are lying there, and a philosophy is only worth anything if it can reach the person lying awake at the end of a long day. And I think the thing Jake offers, more than any single lesson, is an answer to the particular kind of suffering that keeps most of us up, which is anxiety, the restless churning of a mind that cannot stop reaching into the future and the past. Almost everything that troubles us at night lives in one of those two places. We are turning over something that already happened, replaying it, wishing it had gone differently. Or we are rehearsing something that has not happened yet, running the possibilities, bracing for outcomes that may never come. Very little of our suffering is actually happening right now, in the present moment, where the body is warm and the room is quiet, and nothing is actually wrong. The suffering is almost always a visitor from another time, dragged into the present by a mind that will not stay put. And Jake, more than any character I can think of, simply does not do that. His mind stays put. He lives, to an almost supernatural degree, in the present moment, in the pancake that is cooking now, in the nap that is happening now, in the brother who is beside him now. He does not seem to carry the past around as a weight, which is why he could forgive himself his criminal years so completely, and he does not seem to lean into the future as a threat, which is why he could hear the news of his own death and shrug. The past is done and the future is not here, and Jake, without any effort I can detect, lives in the only place anything real ever actually happens, which is right now. That is the whole of a great deal of contemplative practice, that endless gentle return of the attention to the present. And Jake does it not as a practice, but as a nature. He is already home. He never left. Think about how much of your worry, if you actually examine it, is about protecting a future moment that, when it arrives, you will also spend worrying about the moment after it. That is the trap Jake is not in. He does not defer his contentment. He does not tell himself he will relax once the quest is done, once the fort is secure, once the money is saved, once the danger has passed. He relaxes now, because now is the only time it is possible to relax. because the future you are saving your peace for will itself be a present moment when it comes. And if you have spent your whole life deferring your peace to the next moment, you will defer it right up until there are no more moments left. Jake refuses that bargain from the start. He takes his peace in advance and in full, in the only currency that peace comes in, which is the present, and he lets the future arrive however it will, trusting, as he always does, that he will be loose enough to meet it. I do not want to pretend this is easy, or that you can simply decide to be Jake and wake up cured of a lifetime of anxiety. Jake got there partly by luck, by temperament, by a life that happened to burn the fear out of him in ways most of us would not wish on ourselves. He is a cartoon, and cartoons get to be things we cannot fully be. But he is also a demonstration, a proof of concept, a picture of what a mind at rest actually looks like, and there is real value in just having the picture, in being able to see clearly the thing you are reaching for, even if you cannot reach it all at once. When you watch Jake meet a disaster with a shrug, you are watching a model of a possibility. The possibility that the disaster is not actually as large as your fear of it, that most of what you are bracing against will either not happen or will turn out to be survivable. The way Jake's own foretold death turned out to be a rescue. He accepted the worst, and the worst did not come, and even if it had come, the acceptance would still have been the better way to wait for it. So if you take one thing from this dog into your own tired mind tonight, let it be that. Not that nothing matters, because things matter to Jake enormously. His brother matters, his family matters, the rabbit in the storm matters, but that the mattering does not require the worrying, that you can care about things deeply and still hold them loosely, that love and anxiety are not the same thing, and you can have the first without the second. Jake loved more completely than almost anyone in his whole world, loved so completely he gave up heaven to keep loving, and he did it all, without the churning, without the bracing, without the sleepless nights. He shows you that peace is not the absence of love, and love is not the presence of fear, and that a creature can hold on to everything that matters with an open hand instead of a clenched one. That is the gift. That is the thing under all the pancakes and the naps and the goofy voice. A way of loving the world completely while being at peace with losing all of it, and it is available, in small doses, to anyone willing to keep returning their attention to the only moment that is ever actually here. I have been talking about Jake as though he were a real creature this whole time, which is the way a good character makes you talk. But he is of course a made thing, and it is worth spending a little while on the people who made him, because the philosophy I have been tracing did not appear by accident. Adventure Time was created by Pendleton Ward, and it premiered on Cartoon Network in April of 2010, and it ran for 10 seasons and something like 283 episodes before it ended in September of 2018. A remarkably long life for an animated series, long enough for the show and its characters to visibly grow and deepen over time. And the Jake we have been discussing, the philosophical Jake, the one who accepts death and reaches the 50th dead world, is not who the character was at the very beginning. Early Jake is broader, simpler, more of a straightforward comic sidekick, the funny dog who cracks jokes and helps with the adventure, the depth accumulated. The show grew the character the way you grow a friendship, slowly, over years, until the goofy dog turned out to contain all these rooms nobody knew were there. A huge part of that is the voice, and I mentioned John DiMaggio at the start, but I want to come back to him, now that you have seen the whole arc, because his performance is doing something remarkable, and mostly invisible. DiMaggio, who most people know as Bender, the loud, brash robot, could have made Jake just another version of that swagger, and in the early episodes there is some of that, the confidence, the rasp, the comic bluster. But listen to how the performance changes over the run. As the writing deepens, DiMaggio finds a warmth and a gentleness underneath the swagger, a lower gear, and in the quiet episodes, in Jake the Brick, in the moments of acceptance and grief, the voice does something the brash early Jake could never have done. It goes soft, it goes tender, it carries the weight of a creature who has understood something. The same actor who can make Jake bellow a joke can make him narrate the life of a rabbit with a tenderness that made an entire fictional country weep. And it is the range of that voice, its ability to hold both the goofball and the sage at once, that lets Jake be everything I have been describing, without ever feeling like two different characters. And there is Pendleton Ward's original instinct about the character, that little seed I told you about at the start, that of the two heroes. Jake was the one who was more into the loot. That is such a small, offhand piece of characterization, almost a joke, and yet the entire philosophy grew out of it. Because that one detail, that Jake wanted the reward and the comfort more than the glory and the fight, is the seed of everything, of the hedonism, of the contentment, of the refusal to strive, of the whole different theory of what a life is for. The writers who came after, over 10 years, took that seed seriously, followed it where it led, and it led all the way to a dog giving up heaven to reincarnate with his brother. That is what good long-form storytelling does. It plants a tiny true thing early, and then has the patience to let it grow into something enormous. And the philosophy of Jake is really the story of a throwaway character note being taken more and more seriously by more and more writers, until it became one of the most complete portraits of contentment in all of animation. I think it matters too that the series never sat Jake down and made him explain his philosophy. Never gave him a monologue where he lays out his worldview in tidy points. Everything I have spent this whole time drawing out, the story delivered sideways, in action, in small moments, in the way he met things rather than in anything he said about how to meet things. That is a real achievement of craft, and it is deliberate. A lesser show would have made Jake the wise mentor who dispenses aphorisms, and the aphorisms would have been forgettable, because we forget aphorisms almost instantly. Instead, the show made Jake a way of being that you absorb by watching, the same way Finn absorbed it by living beside him, so that the philosophy gets into you not as a set of statements you could write down, but as a felt sense of a possibility, a memory of how it looked when a certain creature was at peace. That is a much deeper way to teach, and it is why people who watch this show as children carry Jake around in them for the rest of their lives, not as a list of lessons, but as a feeling, a warmth, a picture of what unhurried love might look like. There is one more contrast I want to draw before we let this rest, and it is the one between Jake and Finn, not as brothers this time, but as two whole opposing philosophies of how to be alive, because Adventure Time is really an argument between them, carried on gently across 10 years, and it never fully picks a winner. Finn is the striver. Finn believes a life is made of quests, of becoming a better and braver and more righteous person, of facing the hard thing head-on and growing through the facing of it. Finn cares desperately about being good, about doing right, about the outcome and the meaning and the mattering. He is intense, he is earnest, he is forever wrestling with his own conscience, and he grows more than any other character in the series precisely because he treats his own life as a project to be worked on. If Finn had a philosophy on a poster, it would be about effort, about heroism, about the long, hard road to becoming who you are meant to be. And Jake is the opposite in almost every respect. Jake does not treat his life as a project. He does not strive to become better, does not wrestle with his conscience much, does not measure his days against who he is meant to be, because he is already, comfortably, who he is. Where Finn reaches, Jake rests. Where Finn asks what a thing means, Jake asks whether it is fun. Where Finn faces the hard thing head-on, Jake flows around it, or naps through it, or turns it into a song. And the show sets these two ways of living side by side, in the same house, on the same adventures, for years, and it never says one of them is right. It says, instead, that they need each other, that each one is incomplete without the other, that Finn without Jake would burn himself out on his own intensity, would take everything too seriously, would be crushed under the weight of a life lived entirely as a moral quest, and that Jake without Finn would drift, would never be pushed to grow, would let his contentment slide all the way into a comfortable nothing. They are two halves of a complete way of being human, and the genius of the story is that it refuses to resolve them into one. It does not have Finn slowly teach Jake to care more, or have Jake slowly teach Finn to relax, until they meet in some sensible middle. It keeps them distinct, keeps the tension alive, because the tension is the point. A good life probably does need both of them, needs the striving and the resting, the effort and the ease, the taking seriously and the letting go, and the mistake is to think you have to choose. Finn's way, alone, becomes exhausting and self-punishing. Jake's way, alone, becomes aimless and slack. Together they are whole, the hero and the sage, the one who reaches and the one who rests. And Adventure Time loves them both exactly as they are, without ever asking either to become the other. But if I am honest about which one the show holds up as the deeper, when everything is on the line, when death arrives, when the universe is unraveling, when the final choices have to be made, it is Jake's philosophy that turns out to have the last word. It is Jake who accepts death with grace, while everyone else fears it. It is Jake who reaches the top of that afterlife by not wanting it. It is Jake's way of holding life loosely that survives contact with the largest and hardest facts of existence, while Finn's intensity, magnificent as it is, keeps getting wounded by a world that will not conform to his hopes. Finn's philosophy is the one you need to build a life. Jake's philosophy is the one you need to make peace with the fact that the life will end. And since every life does end, since that is the one appointment none of us miss, there is a sense in which Jake's quiet way is the one that has to be right in the last analysis, the one that meets the final fact standing up. Finn teaches you how to live. Jake teaches you how to have lived, and be at peace with it, and let it go. There is a question I have been circling this whole time without asking it directly, and now, near the end, I want to ask it, which is why a dog? Of all the creatures the series could have chosen to carry its deepest wisdom, why did it land on a dog? And I do not think that is a small or arbitrary choice, because dogs, real dogs, the ones asleep at the foot of the bed while you listen to this, are already a kind of everyday teacher of exactly the thing Jake embodies. A dog lives almost entirely in the present. A dog does not carry yesterday's argument into today. A dog does not lie awake dreading next week. A dog is completely, uncomplicatedly delighted by a walk, a meal, a warm spot, the return of the person it loves, and it takes that delight fully, every time, without holding any of it back, without telling itself that this walk is not as good as some remembered better walk, or some imagined future one. A dog is present the way we are always trying and failing to be present, and it does it without effort, without philosophy, just by being a dog. So the story made it sage a dog, because dogs already are what the sages are trying to teach, and Jake is simply a dog turned up to the level where he can talk about it, or rather where he can be watched doing it while other characters talk about it around him. Everything I have called Taoist or Buddhist or Epicurean in him is, at bottom, just dog. Just the ordinary wisdom of an animal that has never once worried about its own death until the moment arrives, and does not much worry even then. When you love a dog, part of what you love, I think, is exactly this: that it is so at home in its own life, so free of the anxious human machinery, so purely glad to be here, and being near it reminds you that such a state is even possible, that a living thing can simply be content, and that maybe some small piece of that contentment is available to you too, by contagion, by sitting near it and slowing down to its pace. And there is a heartbreak folded into loving a dog, which is the same heartbreak folded into the whole story of Jake, and it is that dogs do not live very long. You get them for a while, a decade or so if you are lucky, and then they go, and the very thing that made them such good teachers of presence, their easy acceptance, their lack of dread, becomes the thing that makes losing them so hard, because they meet their own ending with the same uncomplaining grace they met everything else, and you are the one left holding the grief they were too wise to carry. That is Jake exactly. That is why his death lands the way it does, because it is every dog's death, the loss of the creature who taught you how to be present simply by being present, and the show knew that a dog dying of old age after a long good life is one of the more universally understood sorrows there is, and it built its entire ending on that knowledge. So when I say the philosophy of Jake, I am partly saying the philosophy of dogs, the quiet, everyday wisdom that has been sleeping at the foot of human beds for thousands of years, the creature that cannot tell you anything and shows you everything, that models a way of being at home in a life you did not choose and will not keep. Jake is that wisdom given a voice, given 10 years and 283 episodes to demonstrate itself, given a death that means as much as any death in fiction. And the reason it works, the reason a cartoon dog can carry all this weight without collapsing under it, is that we already half knew it. We have all met a version of Jake, asleep in the sun, glad to see us, unafraid, and we have all had to say goodbye to one, and Adventure Time is just telling us, in the gentlest way it can, that the goodbye was always the price of the gladness, and that the gladness was worth it, and that the creature who taught us how to be here was also, all along, teaching us how to let go. There is a line from early in the series that I have been saving, because it fits here, at the end, though I have to be honest about it, because the sources do not fully agree on who says it. The line is that everything small is just a small version of something big. It floats around attributed sometimes to Jake and sometimes to Finn, and I have not been able to settle which of them actually delivers it, so I will not tell you it is a Jake quote for certain. But the thought belongs to the world these two share, and it belongs especially to the way Jake sees things. So let me hold it up for a moment anyway, because it is one of those accidental pieces of profundity the show tosses off and keeps walking. Everything small is a small version of something big. On the surface, it is almost nonsense, a bit of dream logic. Underneath it is a whole way of looking at the world. The same way Jake looked at the rabbit in the storm. The same way he looked at the little people made of his own flesh. The refusal to believe that anything is too small to contain everything. Because that is the through line of all of it. If I had to name the single deepest habit of Jake's mind, he does not believe in small things. He believes that a pancake contains as much joy as a feast, that a rabbit contains as much drama as a war, that a nap in the sun contains as much peace as any enlightenment, that a single afternoon with his brother contains the whole meaning of a life. Nothing is beneath his full attention, because to Jake there is no such thing as a lesser moment. Only moments people are too distracted to notice are enormous, and that is why he never needs the grand version of anything. He never needs the once-in-a-lifetime experience, the peak, the achievement, the big enormous meaningful event, because he has found the enormous meaningful event hiding inside the ordinary Tuesday, inside the small version, which was a full version of something big all along. I think that is the easiest thing to carry away from him, more portable even than the acceptance of death, because you do not have to be dying to use it. You can use it tomorrow, over breakfast. The idea that the small moment you are about to have, the cup of coffee, the walk to work, the ordinary conversation, is not a small moment at all, but a small version of something big, a complete instance of being alive, deserving of the same attention you would give to something you had labeled important. Jake labeled almost nothing important, which sounds like it would make everything meaningless, and instead it did the opposite. It made everything meaningful, because once nothing is more important than anything else, everything gets to be as important as everything else, and a life stops being a few big moments strung together by a lot of dead time, and becomes, instead, one continuous unbroken thing, every second of it a small version of the whole enormous business of existing. Whoever actually said that line, Jake is the one who lived it, and it might be the closest the story ever came to writing his philosophy down in a single sentence, almost by accident, the way all his best wisdom arrived. And there is a last thing about him worth naming before we close, which is that his joy, in a world as sad as his, is a kind of quiet defiance, though he would never call it that. Remember the world he lives in, the ruined earth, the aftermath of a war that ended almost everything, a landscape haunted by loss and populated by characters carrying centuries of grief. It would be so easy, in a world like that, to be grim, to decide that a place built on so much death does not deserve a song, that joy is naive, that the only honest response to a broken world is sorrow. A lot of thoughtful people land exactly there, and Adventure Time is full of characters who did. But Jake refuses it. Jake makes his pancakes and sings his song and takes his naps and loves his brother in the middle of the ruins, not because he does not see the sorrow, but because he does see it, and has decided, against it, to be glad anyway. That is a much braver thing than it looks like from the outside, and I think it is easy to mistake for shallowness. This insistence on joy in a world that seems to argue against it. But choosing gladness, in full view of the grief, is not the same as ignoring the grief. It is a response to it, maybe the only response that does not simply add more darkness to the dark. Jake looked at a world that had every reason to despair and decided to fill it with small, warm things instead, with music and food and affection and ease, and in doing so he became a kind of light source, the creature everyone else warmed themselves against. His contentment was not a failure to understand how bad things were. It was a decision about how to live given how bad things were, and it was, in its unassuming way, one of the most courageous decisions anyone in the whole series ever made, to keep the light on in a house that the storm was always coming for, and to invite everyone in, and to sing while the wind rose. And I think that is finally why the goofy dog outlasts the grand villains in the memory, why people who watch this show as children carry Jake, and not the Lich, into their adult lives. The forces of grief and chaos and annihilation in the story are enormous and impressive, and, in the end, oddly forgettable, because they only ever say one thing, that everything ends. Jake says something much harder and much rarer, which is yes, everything ends, and it is still worth loving, still worth singing about, still worth showing up for, right up until the last afternoon. Anyone can be sad about a broken world. It takes a particular kind of soul to be glad in one, without lying to itself about the brokenness. And that soul, it turns out, was a stretchy yellow dog who mostly wanted a snack and a nap and his brother nearby, and who happened, along the way, to solve the one problem all the philosophers were working on. So here we are, at the end of it, and you are hopefully most of the way to sleep by now, which is exactly where a video about Jake should leave you, unhurried and warm and no longer bracing against anything. It is a strange thing, when you step back, that a show about a boy and his magic dog turned into one of the most beloved and most seriously discussed pieces of animation of its whole era, that people write philosophy books about it, and trace Taoism through it, and argue about its afterlife, and cry over the death of a cartoon dog as though they had lost someone real. But it is not really so strange, because the show earned all of it, patiently, over 10 years, by taking its characters more seriously than anyone expected a candy-colored cartoon to take anything, and by giving its deepest truths not to its grandest figures, but to its gentlest one, to the lazy, greedy, loyal, loving, formerly criminal, endlessly content magic dog who was more into the loot. Adventure Time has settled now into the place the truly lasting shows settle into. The place where a whole generation carries it around inside them, half memory and half feeling, and where new people keep finding it and being surprised by how much weight it turns out to hold. And I think Jake is a big part of why it lasts, because in a culture that is forever telling you to strive, to optimize, to hustle, to want more and reach further and never be satisfied, Jake stands there, or lies there, really, in a warm spot in the sun, offering the opposite and much rarer message, that you are allowed to be content, that the small moment is enough, that you can love the world completely while holding it with an open hand, that the ending, when it comes, is not a tragedy but a turn, and that the wisest thing a creature can do with a short good life is enjoy it, love a few people all the way, and let it go without a fight when the time comes. He learned all of that without meaning to, sideways, by being a certain kind of dog. And somehow, in learning it so effortlessly, he taught it to millions of people who have been trying to learn it the hard way their whole lives. So the next time you are lying awake, bracing against something that has not happened yet, or turning over something that already has, you might think of the dog in the shack, the one who wanted nothing more than to be a small, still thing, holding a wall up while the storm rolled through. At peace, content, unafraid, watching a rabbit, and finding the whole of existence in it. That is the philosophy of Jake, and it does not really need a 2-hour video to explain it, though I hope you enjoyed the long, slow walk through it anyway. It only needs you to remember, now and then, in the small hours, that the moment you are in is enough, that you are allowed to rest, and that letting go is not the same as losing. Thank you for spending this time with me, and with Jake. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.